The mud was cold. It wasn't just dirt. It was a freezing, clinging paste that seeped through the knees of my denim jeans and bit into my skin. I was on my knees in the middle of a November downpour, fighting a losing battle against a sagging wooden post. The wind howled through the estate, tearing at the skeletal branches of the old oaks, threatening to smash the trellis against the south window of the manor. That was a window. If the trellis fell, it would shatter the glass. If the glass shattered, the cold would get in. And if the cold got in, Clara would wake up. I couldn't let Clara wake up, not now. She needed her rest more than I needed to feel my fingers. My name is Liam. At 32, most men in my field, landscape architecture, were sitting in heated offices in Chicago or New York, drawing lines on backlit screens and sipping artisanal coffee. They were building careers. They were building futures. I was in the mud, hammering a rusted nail into wet wood, trying to save a hydrangea bush that wouldn't bloom for another 5 months. "Hold on," I grunted through gritted teeth, the hammer slipping in my wet grip. "Just hold on." I struck the nail. The wood groaned but held. I wrapped a heavy gauge wire around the post and anchored it to the stone foundation. The wind shoved me hard against the wall, but the trellis stayed put. The white paint was peeling, revealing the grey, weathered timber underneath. It looked like my hands, rough, scarred, tired. I wiped the rain from my eyes and looked up at the window. The light was dim inside, just the soft glow of the night light I had installed last week. She was safe. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I packed my life into 2 cardboard boxes and a duffel bag to come here. Back then, the family called it a sabbatical. They said it was noble of me to look after Grandma Clara while she recovered from her hip surgery. But the hip healed, and the mind began to break. The dementia didn't come like a flood. It came like a thief, stealing small things first. Keys, names. Then it stole time. She would wake up thinking it was 1975. Then it stole people. She forgot my mother. She forgot her late husband's death. And eventually, everyone else forgot her. The visits from aunts and uncles stopped. The phone calls dwindled to voicemails. The grand estate, once the jewel of the family, became a burden, a waiting room for the inevitable. Only I stayed. I picked up my toolbox and trudged toward the back door. My boots squelched in the waterlogged grass.
The estate was massive. 10 acres of rolling hills, a koi pond that needed constant filtration, and a rose garden that was Clara's pride and joy. Maintaining it alone was a full-time job. Caring for Clara was another. I entered the mudroom, peeling off the soaked layers of canvas and flannel. The silence of the house hit me instantly. It was a heavy, expensive silence. The kind found in places filled with antique mahogany and velvet drapes, where dust motes danced in beams of light that never seemed to move. I washed my hands at the utility sink. The water ran brown, swirling with the soil of the garden. I scrubbed until the skin was raw. Clara didn't like dirt inside. She was a lady of high standards, even if she couldn't remember which decade those standards applied to. I walked softly down the hallway, the floorboards creaking familiar tunes under my weight.
I knew exactly where to step to avoid the noise. Third plank from the left. Skip the rug edge. It was a dance I had perfected over 1,000 nights. I pushed her bedroom door open, just the crack. She was sitting up. My heart skipped a beat. She should have been asleep. The doctor said the medication would keep her under until morning. "Arthur?" Her voice trembled. It was thin, like paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. I froze. Arthur was my grandfather. He had died 20 years ago. I took a breath, pushed the door open, and stepped into the warm amber light. "It's me, Grandma. It's Liam." She squinted at me, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes, once a piercing blue that could terrify a boardroom of executives, were now cloudy and soft. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second, I saw a spark of recognition. "Liam?" she whispered. "Yes," I smiled, walking to the bedside. "I was just fixing the trellis. The wind is strong tonight." She looked past me toward the dark window. "Is the garden safe?" "It's safe," I assured her, pulling the duvet up to her chin. "The hydrangeas are tied down. The roses are covered. Nothing will hurt them." She relaxed, sinking back into the pillows. "You're a good boy, Liam. You have Arthur's hands." I looked down at my hands. They were calloused, stained, and shaking slightly from the cold. Arthur had been a carpenter before he built the family business. He built things. I supposed I was keeping things from falling apart. It wasn't quite the same, but it was close enough. "Go to sleep, Grandma," I whispered. "Don't let them take it," she mumbled, her eyes closing. "Take what?" "The green," she sighed, drifting off. "Don't let them take the green."
I stood there for a long time, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. It was shallow, a fragile sound against the drumming of the rain outside. The green. She meant the garden. It was the only thing that made sense to her anymore. The seasons were the only clock she trusted. I left the room and went to the kitchen. It was midnight. My dinner was a cold sandwich I had made 4 hours ago. I sat at the small wooden island, the vast, marble-countered kitchen stretching out into the darkness behind me. My phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from Facebook. Julian posted a new photo. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. It was Julian, my cousin. He was at a gala in Manhattan, tuxedo, champagne flute held high, a glistening blonde woman on his arm. The caption read, "Building empires. Legacy is everything." I chewed my dry sandwich.
Julian hadn't visited in 6 months. The last time he came, he stayed for 45 minutes, complained that the house smelled like old people, and asked if I had found the deed to the summer cottage yet. I swiped the screen off. The darkness returned. I wasn't jealous. I told myself that every day. I wasn't jealous of his money, his car, or his life in the city. I had chosen this. I had chosen to be here because when I was 10, Clara was the only one who came to my school play when my parents were too busy working. I was here because she taught me how to plant a seed and trust that it would grow. But looking at that photo, feeling the ache in my back and the cold in my bones, a small, bitter voice whispered in my ear, "You are burying your life here, Liam, and they are laughing at you." The next morning, the storm had passed. The sky was a bruised purple, clearing slowly into a pale winter blue. The air was crisp and smelled of wet earth and pine needles. I was up at 5 a.m. Routine was my anchor. Boil water, oats for Clara, toast for me. Crush the 3 different pills she needed for her heart and mix them into the applesauce so she wouldn't spit them out. Check the oxygen tank levels. By 8 a.m., I had her settled in the sunroom. It was her favorite spot. The glass walls looked out over the south lawn, where the morning sun hid the frost-covered grass, turning the world into diamonds. "It's bright," Clara said, staring at a cardinal hopping on the feeder. "It's a beautiful day," I said, adjusting the blanket over her knees. "I'm going to prune the wisteria today. You can watch from here." "Wisteria," she repeated, testing the word. "Purple rain." Exactly. I was gathering my shears when the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tiles broke the peace. It wasn't the mailman. It was too aggressive. I looked out the driveway. A silver Porsche Cayenne was winding its way up the path, splashing mud onto its pristine doors. Julian. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. He never called ahead. He liked the element of surprise. It made him feel in control. I wiped my hands on my pants and walked out to the front porch. The car stopped, and the engine purred for a moment before cutting out. The door opened and Julian stepped out. He looked exactly like his photos. Perfect haircut, cashmere coat, Italian leather shoes that cost more than my truck. He took off his sunglasses, scanning the facade of the house with a critical eye. "Liam," he called out, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look at you, still playing in the dirt?" "Good morning, Julian," I said, keeping my voice level. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" He walked up the steps, bypassing me to head straight for the door. Can't a grandson visit his favorite matriarch? Besides, I was in the area. Meeting a client in the Hamptons. Thought I'd swing by, check on the assets. Assets, not grandma. "She's in the sunroom," I said, following him. "She's having a good morning. Please don't upset her." "Upset her? I'm the life of the party, Liam. You know that." He strode into the house, his shoes clicking loudly on the hardwood. I winced. He brought a chaotic energy that disrupted the delicate ecosystem I had built. When we entered the sunroom, Clara didn't turn around. She was still watching the cardinal. "Grandma!" Julian boomed, spreading his arms. Clara jumped, her hand flying to her chest. She turned, eyes wide with fear. She looked at him, then at me, confused. "Who is that?" she whispered to me. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, tighter this time. "It's Julian, Grandma, your favorite. I brought you something." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and placed it on the table. He didn't open it for her. He just left it there, like an offering to a deity he didn't believe in. "Julian," she echoed. She looked at his coat, his face. "You look like the taxman." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop a laugh. "Very funny, Grandma," Julian said, pulling up a chair and sitting too close. "So, how are we doing? Is Liam treating you right? Is he feeding you?" He cast a side glance at me, his eyes scanning my worn flannel shirt and the dirt under my fingernails. It was a look of calculated pity. "Liam is..." Clara paused, searching for the word. "Liam is the gardener." Julian chuckled, a dry, sharp sound. "Yes, he certainly is. That's all he does, isn't it? Gardens and hides." He turned his full attention to me. The mask slipped a little. "Mom says you asked for money for roof repairs again. $5,000, Liam. Really?" "The slate tiles on the west wing are slipping," I explained calmly. "If we don't fix them, the water damage will rot the beams. It's preventative." "It's a money pit," Julian snapped, keeping his voice low so Clara wouldn't track the aggression. "This whole place is a black hole. We pump money in and you just spend it. On dirt, on flowers, on tiles nobody sees." "I send receipts for everything," I said, feeling the heat rise in my neck. "Every nail, every bag of fertilizer. You see the spreadsheets." "I see numbers on a page." Julian leaned back, crossing his legs. "But I also see you living here, rent-free, no job, driving Grandma's old truck, eating her food. From the outside, Liam, it looks like a pretty sweet deal for a guy who couldn't handle the pressure of a real architecture firm." There it was, The jab I knew was coming. I'm here because no one else is, I said quietly. If I leave, who changes her sheets? Who wakes up at 3 a.m. when she thinks the house is on fire? You? Julian waved his hand dismissively. We could hire professionals. A nursing home would be better equipped, more sanitary. She wants to be home, I said firmly. She built this house. She dies in this house. That was the promise. Promises change when the bank account drains. Julian stood up. He walked over to the window, looking out at the garden I had spent 3 years nurturing. You know, this land is prime real estate. Developers have been sniffing around. If we subdivided the lot... No, I said. It's not your call, Liam. He turned, his eyes cold. You don't own this place. You're just... help. He looked at his watch. I have to run. Lunch meeting. He bent down and kissed Clara on the forehead. She flinched. Bye, Grandma. Use the supplements I sent last month. Good for the brain. He walked past me, stopping at the doorway. He leaned in, his cologne overpowering the scent of lavender in the room. Don't get too comfortable, cousin. Things are going to change soon. The family is talking. Talking about what? About the fact that you're the only one with access to her checkbook. He smirked. And how strange it is that a woman who never spent a dime on herself is suddenly burning through cash. He patted my shoulder. It felt like a threat. Just a heads up. We're watching. He left. I heard the front door slam, then the roar of the Porsche engine. The silence returned, but it felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was stained. I looked at Clara. She was staring at the velvet box he had left. Her trembling fingers reached out and opened it. Inside was a gold brooch shaped like a dollar sign, encrusted with tiny fake diamonds. It was tacky. It was something you gave a stranger. Clara looked at it, then looked at me. He has cold eyes, she whispered. I walked over and knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. It was warm and frail. He's gone now, Grandma. Is he? She asked, her voice surprisingly clear. The wolves don't leave, Liam. They circle. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. You have to be the wall, she said intensely, staring into my soul. Be the stone wall. Protect the garden. I will, I promised. But a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. I spent the rest of the day working harder than usual. I channeled my anger into the earth. I dug a new trench for the drainage system near the north gate. I hauled 50-pound bags of mulch until my shoulders screamed. I needed the pain. The physical pain drowned out the voice of Julian in my head. Greedy. Mooch. Thief. Was I? I stopped, leaning on my shovel, sweat dripping down my nose. I looked at the house. It was a mansion, yes. But to me, it was just a patient. A giant, crumbling patient that needed constant care. I hadn't bought a new shirt in 2 years. I hadn't been on a date in 3. My bank account had $300 in it. But Julian was right about one thing. I had access. I signed the checks because Clara couldn't hold a pen anymore. I managed the funds. And to someone who only looked at the bottom line, someone who didn't know that specialized dementia care equipment costs thousands, or that heating a 100-year-old stone house in winter was a fortune. To them, it could look like theft. The sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn. The trees looked like grasping fingers. I went inside to prepare dinner. The house felt colder tonight. As I chopped vegetables for the soup, I heard a sound from upstairs. A thud. It was a heavy, dull sound, not the creak of a floorboard. I dropped the knife. Grandma? Silence. Clara? I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway seemed endlessly long. Her bedroom door was open. The lamp was on. But the bed was empty. Grandma! I found her in the bathroom. She was on the floor, curled up on the cold tiles. Her face was pale, her breathing ragged. I slipped, she gasped, clutching her chest. The water. I was at her side in an instant, checking her pulse. It was erratic, fluttering like a moth against a window pane. I've got you, I said, my voice shaking. I'm calling 911. No, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were terrified. No hospital, please, not there. They steal your name there. You're hurt, Clara. You need a doctor. Stay, she wheezed. Just stay. I pulled my phone out with one hand while supporting her head with the other. I dialed. But as the operator answered, I looked at the bathroom sink. There was a glass of water spilled, and next to it, the bottle of heart medication. It was open. Pills were scattered on the floor. Had she taken them? Had she missed a dose? Or had she taken too many? 911, what is your emergency? My grandmother, I choked out. She collapsed. Possible heart failure. Please hurry. I hung up and looked down at her. She was fading. The clarity was gone, replaced by a grey fog. Arthur, she whispered, looking past my shoulder at the ceiling. Is the garden ready? Yes, I cried, tears hot on my face. Yes, it's ready. The flowers are beautiful. She smiled, a small, peaceful curve of her lips. Good, she breathed. I'm tired of the winter. And then she closed her eyes. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the window pane I had fought so hard to protect. But inside, the silence was absolute. It was the silence of an ending. And in that silence, I knew my war had just begun. The paramedics didn't use the sirens when they left. There was no need for urgency anymore. I stood on the front porch, the cold night air biting through my thin flannel shirt, watching the ambulance disappear down the long, winding driveway. The flashing red lights reflected off the wet tree trunks, pulsing like a slow, dying heartbeat, until they vanished around the bend. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. It was a vacuum. I walked back inside. The house felt massive. Without Clara's shallow breathing, without the rhythmic hiss of her oxygen machine, the rooms felt like cavernous, hollow chests. I went back to the bathroom to clean up the spilled water. My hands moved on autopilot. Wipe the tile, cap the medicine bottle, pick up the towel. I was scrubbing a spot on the floor that was already clean when the front door opened. It wasn't a hesitant opening. It was the confident, sweeping entrance of ownership. Liam? It was Julian. He had turned the car around. Or maybe he had never really left. Maybe he had just waited at the end of the road, watching the ambulance arrive, calculating the timeline. I didn't stand up. I stayed on my knees on the bathroom floor, clutching the damp towel. She's gone, I said. My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Julian appeared in the doorway. He was still wearing his camel hair coat, not a wrinkle on it. He looked down at me, his face arranging itself into a mask of practiced solemnity. He didn't come in to comfort me. He stayed on the threshold, treating the bathroom like a contaminated zone. I saw the lights, he said softly. I called Mother. She's flying in from Paris tomorrow. The rest of the family has been notified. He took a step back into the hallway. Leave that, Liam. The cleaners will handle it. I need to clean it, I said, scrubbing harder. She hated a mess. She's dead, Liam, Julian said. The words were sharp, cutting through the fog in my brain. She doesn't care about the floor anymore. He walked away toward the study, Clara's office. I heard the distinct click of the heavy oak door opening. I dropped the towel and scrambled to my feet. What are you doing? I followed him. He was already at her desk, the large mahogany workspace where Clara had built her empire decades ago. He was opening drawers. We need to secure the documents, Julian said without looking up. He was flipping through files with rapid, efficient movements. Insurance policies, bank ledgers, the deed to the estate. In moments like this, chaos breeds theft. We have to be careful. Careful of what? I asked, standing in the doorway. I've been managing her paperwork for 3 years. It's all organized. Julian paused. He pulled out a thick red binder, the household expense log I kept meticulously. He weighed it in his hand, a smirk touching the corner of his mouth. Yes, he said. That's exactly what I'm worried about. He dropped the binder into his briefcase and snapped it shut. Go get some sleep, Liam. You look terrible. The real work begins tomorrow. The next 3 days were a blur of black suits and whispered conversations I wasn't invited to. The house was transformed. It was no longer a home, it was a stage. Professional cleaners arrived at dawn, scrubbing away the scent of lavender and old age, replacing it with the chemical smell of lemon polish. Caterers took over the kitchen, where I had made oatmeal every morning. They brought trays of shrimp, mini quiches, and expensive wine. The family arrived in waves. Aunts I hadn't seen in a decade. Cousins who spent the entire time looking at their phones. They hugged me, but their embraces were stiff, their bodies leaning away as if poverty was contagious. You look tired, Liam, Aunt Sarah said, examining my frayed collar. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay. It must be a relief, finally, to be done with the burden. She wasn't a burden, I said. Of course, of course. She patted my arm dismissively. But 3 years is a long time to be out of the workforce. What will you do now? Go back to landscaping? She said landscaping, the way one might say garbage collection. I'm an architect, Sarah, I corrected gently. Right. Well, I'm sure Julian can help you with your resume. He knows everyone. I walked away. I couldn't breathe in there. I went out to the garden. The funeral service was held on the lawn, by the rose garden, just as Clara had wanted. It was a cold grey day. 100 people stood on the grass. They wore Italian wool and huddled under large black umbrellas. I stood at the back, alone. I didn't have an umbrella. The drizzle misted my face, mixing with the tears I refused to let fall in front of them. The priest spoke about Clara's business acumen, her philanthropy, her strength. He didn't mention how she liked to hum while watching the birds, or how she was terrified of thunder. He spoke about the legend, not the woman. When the service ended, Julian stepped up to the podium. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black suit. He spoke eloquently about legacy, about carrying the torch. He cried at exactly the right moment, a single photogenic tear sliding down his cheek. Grandma Clara taught us the value of hard work, he said, his voice breaking. She despised laziness. She despised those who take without giving, and in her honor, we will protect what she built. He looked directly at me when he said it. The crowd followed his gaze. 100 pairs of eyes turned to the man at the back, the one with the wet hair and the cheap suit standing in the mud. I felt naked. I felt branded. After the burial, the guests retreated to the manor for the wake. I stayed by the fresh grave. The workers were filling it in. I picked up a handful of soil, dark, rich earth that I had composted myself last autumn. "Goodbye, Clara," I whispered, dropping the dirt onto the coffin. "I'll keep the weeds away." When I finally walked back to the house, I tried to enter through the kitchen door, the entrance I always used. It was locked. I frowned and tried the handle again. Locked. I dug into my pocket for my keys. I slid the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. It didn't fit. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I ran around to the front door. It was open for the guests. I slipped inside, breathless. Julian was in the foyer, saying goodbye to a senator. He saw me and excused himself, walking over with a calm, predatory grace. "The key didn't work," I said, holding it up. "Oh, right," Julian nodded, as if remembering a minor detail. "We had the locks changed this morning. Security protocol. With the house empty of residents, the insurance company requires it." "Empty of residents?" I stared at him. "I live here." "Technically," Julian lowered his voice, "you were a live-in caregiver. The patient is deceased. The employment contract ends." "I'm your cousin, Julian, not an employee." "That's a blurry line, isn't it?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You've been living on her dime, Liam. No rent, no bills. A generous stipend. To the rest of the family, that looks a lot like employment." He checked his watch. "You can stay in the guest cottage for tonight, but you'll need to pack your things. The estate is being appraised next week. We need the main house clear." "You're kicking me out?" "I'm managing the transition," he corrected. "Don't make a scene, Liam. Not today. It would be disrespectful to her memory." He walked away before I could answer, disappearing into the crowd of mourners. I stood there vibrating with rage and humiliation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table of expensive hors d'oeuvres. But I knew that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted the unstable, angry Liam. The Liam who snapped. I turned and walked out. I didn't go to the guest cottage. I went to the greenhouse. It was warm inside, smelling of damp earth and chlorophyll. I sat on an overturned bucket and put my head in my hands. I had lost my grandmother. Now I was losing my home. And if Julian's speech was any indication, I was about to lose my reputation too. 2 days later, the summons came. It wasn't a court summons, not yet. It was an email from the family attorney, Mr. Henderson. Reading of the last will and testament of Clara Vane, Friday, 10 a.m. I spent the intervening days in the small, drafty guest cottage at the edge of the property. I packed my life into the same 2 boxes I had arrived with. It was pathetic how little I had accumulated. Books, sketch pads, a few photos. I didn't see Julian, but I saw his influence. Several men in suits were constantly coming and going from the main house. They carried briefcases and scanners. I recognized one of the logos on a van. Sterling and Associates, Forensic Accounting. My stomach dropped. Forensic accounting. That wasn't standard for a simple probate. That was for fraud investigations. Julian was building a case. He wasn't just going to kick me out. He was going to destroy me. He was going to prove that the gardener was a parasite. Friday morning arrived with a leaden sky. I put on my suit again. I had tried to iron it, but the fabric was shiny with age. I looked in the mirror. I looked like a defendant. I walked up to the main house. The driveway was filled with cars. The entire family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They stood in clusters on the porch, smoking and talking in hushed tones. When I approached, the conversation died. "Liam," Uncle Robert nodded curtly. He didn't offer his hand. "Robert," I replied. We filed into the library. It was a grand room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive fireplace. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of the long table. He was an old man, a contemporary of my grandfather, with skin like parchment and eyes that had seen too many family feuds. Julian sat at the right hand of the lawyer. He looked relaxed, confident. He had a thick file folder in front of him, separate from the lawyer's documents. I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table, opposite Mr. Henderson. I felt like a child sitting at the grown-up's table by mistake. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Henderson began, his voice raspy. "We are here to honor the wishes of Clara Wayne." The room was silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. "Clara left a standard will drawn up 10 years ago," Henderson said, adjusting his glasses. "However, there have been amendments and codicils." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. It wasn't a kind look. He was an old man, a contemporary of my grandfather, with skin like parchment and eyes that had seen too many family feuds. Julian sat at the right hand of the lawyer. He looked relaxed, confident. He had a thick file folder in front of him, separate from the lawyer's documents. I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table, opposite Mr. Henderson. I felt like a child sitting at the grown-up's table by mistake. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Henderson began, his voice raspy. "We are here to honor the wishes of Clara Wayne." The room was silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. "Clara left a standard will drawn up 10 years ago," Henderson said, adjusting his glasses. "However, there have been amendments and codicils." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. It wasn't a kind look. "Before we proceed to the distribution of assets," Henderson continued, "Julian has raised a concern regarding the estate's liquidity. As the temporary executor named in the emergency clause, he has requested a moment to speak." This was it, the ambush. Julian stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He didn't look at the family. He looked at the papers in front of him. "This is difficult for me," Julian began, his voice heavy with fake reluctance. "I wanted today to be about Grandma, but in reviewing the accounts over the last 48 hours, my team has discovered irregularities." He paused for effect. "Significant irregularities," he emphasized. "Over the last 3 years, coinciding exactly with Liam's tenure as caregiver, nearly $500,000 has been withdrawn from Clara's personal accounts. In cash." A gasp rippled through the room. Aunt Sarah covered her mouth. Uncle Robert glared at me. "500,000? Someone whispered. "No," I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's not true. That money was for the house. The roof repairs, the boiler, the nurses who came on weekends, the medical equipment." "We have the invoices, Liam," Julian interrupted, holding up a sheet of paper. "Or rather, the lack of them. We see checks written to cash, signed by you, using her power of attorney. We see withdrawals at ATMs at casinos." "Casinos?" I shouted. "I've never been to a casino in my life." "There's an ATM at the pharmacy near the reservation where I bought her specialized medicine because it was cheaper. You know that." "I know what the data says," Julian said coldly. "And the data says you bled her dry while she was too sick to notice." "You are lying," I said, my hands shaking. "You are twisting everything." "Sit down, Liam," Uncle Robert barked. "Let him finish." "I will not sit down." I looked around the room, pleading with my eyes. "You all know me. You know I loved her. I gave up everything to be here." "You gave up a failing career to live in a mansion," Julian countered smoothly. And now that the free ride is over, you're panicked. He turned to the lawyer. Mr. Henderson, in light of this potential embezzlement, I move that Liam be disqualified from any inheritance until a full criminal investigation is completed. Criminal? I whispered. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It's a felony, Liam, Julian said softly, almost sadly. Elder abuse, financial exploitation. We're doing you a favor by keeping it civil so far. But if you push... Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Given the evidence presented by the executor, the reading of the bequest for Liam Vane is suspended. The rest of the will, however, stands. I stood there, frozen. The walls of the library seemed to be closing in. They looked at me not as a cousin or a nephew, but as a monster, a thief who stole from a dying woman. I looked at Julian. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was staring at me with a dead, shark-like intensity. He had won. He had taken the narrative, twisted it, and weaponized it before I could even open my mouth. I didn't do it, I said, my voice breaking. I took care of her. You took care of yourself, Julian said. Please leave the room, Liam. This is for family. For family. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. I was no longer family. I was the help who got caught stealing the silver. I turned and walked to the door. My legs felt like lead. As I grasped the handle, I heard Julian's voice resume, calm and professional. Now, regarding the real estate portfolio, I stepped out into the hallway and closed the door. I leaned my back against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. I buried my face in my knees. I had no money, I had no home, and now I had a crime hanging over my head. But as I sat there, listening to the murmurs of approval from inside the library, a cold, hard resolve began to form in my gut. It replaced the panic. They thought I was just a gardener. They thought I just planted flowers. But a gardener knows something they don't. Before you can plant the new seeds, you have to tear out the rot by the roots. And you have to get your hands dirty. I stood up. I wiped my face. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stay. And I was going to find the truth, even if I had to dig up the entire estate to find it. The walk from the manor to the guest cottage was only 200 yards, but it felt like crossing a border between two warring nations. I spent an hour packing. It didn't take long. My life, it turned out, fit into the bed of my rusted pickup truck with room to spare. The truck was a 1998 Ford, the paint peeling like a sunburn. It had belonged to my grandfather Arthur. Julian had laughed when I asked to keep it 3 years ago. Take the scrap metal, he had said. Saves me the towing fee. Now, it was my lifeboat. I carried the last box out. A security guard I didn't recognize was standing by the gate, arms crossed, watching me. He was wearing a uniform with the logo Titan Security. Julian worked fast. He had already hired muscle to make sure the thief didn't steal the copper wiring on his way out. I threw the box into the truck bed. It landed with a hollow thud. Inside the box were my sketchbooks, my drafting tools, and a framed photo of me and Clara from 2 Christmases ago. In the photo, she was lucid, smiling, holding a poinsettia I had forced to gloom early. I looked at the photo one last time before covering it with a tarp. I climbed into the driver's seat. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life, spewing a cloud of blue smoke. I drove down the long driveway. I passed the hydrangeas I had tied down in the storm. I passed the wisteria that needed pruning. I passed the rose garden where Clara was buried. I didn't look back. If I looked back, I would crash. I turned onto the main road. the iron gates swinging shut behind me automatically. I was out. I checked into the Blue Heron Motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed like an angry hornet, and the no vacancy light was permanently broken. Room 12. It smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon air freshener, the universal scent of despair. The carpet was sticky. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners, revealing layers of older, uglier patterns underneath. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and stared at the wall. It was 4 p.m. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. A relentless, angry vibration against the cheap plywood nightstand. I finally picked it up. Notifications were flooding in. Not text messages, not missed calls. Tags. I opened Facebook. My stomach dropped to the floor. A local news outlet, the County Chronicle, had posted a story. Heiress estate in turmoil. Grandson accused of $1 million elder abuse scheme. There was a picture of me. It was a bad one, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Probably today while I was packing the truck. I looked disheveled, angry, my hair wild, hauling a box like a looter. And then the comments. Disgusting, preying on the elderly. I knew him in high school. Always was a weirdo. Lock him up and throw away the key. He lived there for free? Freeloader. I scrolled, my thumb trembling. It wasn't just strangers. It was people I knew. Neighbors, former classmates. Even the owner of the nursery where I bought the mulch had commented. Sad. He seemed like a nice guy, but you never know what happens behind closed doors. Julian hadn't just kicked me out. He had salted the earth. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and landed on the carpet, screen down. I lay back on the bed and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. They looked like maps of countries that didn't exist. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I was back in the garden. I could smell the damp soil. I could hear Clara's voice. The weeds will always try to take over, Liam. You have to know which ones to pull and which ones to poison. I don't have any poison, Grandma, I whispered to the empty room. I don't even have a shovel. The next morning, the reality of my finances hit me. I had $340 in my checking account. The motel was $50 a night. Gas was $4 a gallon. Food was optional. I needed a lawyer. I spent the morning making calls from the motel landline because I was terrified of turning my phone back on. I'm sorry, Mr. Vane, the first lawyer said, his tone icy. My firm represents the bank that holds the Vane Estate Trust. Conflict of interest. I can't take the case without a retainer, the second one said. $5,000 up front. 5,000? I laughed. A hysterical, jagged sound. I can give you a very nice sketch of your office. He hung up. The third call was to an old friend from college, Ben, who practiced family law in the city. Liam, Ben said, his voice lowered as if he was afraid of being overheard. Man, I saw the news. It's bad. It's a lie, Ben. You know me. I know you, Ben sighed. But the optics are terrible. Julian has the forensic audit. He has the press. If you go to court, they'll tear you apart. Do you have proof? Hard evidence that the money was spent on her? I have my memory. I have the fact that the house didn't fall down. That's not evidence, Liam. That's an anecdote. You need receipts. You need a paper trail that matches the withdrawals exactly. The receipts are in the house, I shouted. In the office. Julian took the binders. Then they're gone, Ben said flatly. If he's framing you, those binders are already in a shredder. Liam, listen to me. If they offer you a deal, take it. What? Take the deal. Avoid jail. Start over somewhere else. If you fight this and lose, you're looking at 10 years. Mandatory minimums for elder abuse are no joke. I didn't do it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It doesn't matter what you did, Ben said. It matters what they can prove. I have to go, Liam. Good luck. The line went dead. I walked out of the motel room for air. The parking lot was grey and wet. A stray dog was sniffing at a dumpster. I felt a kinship with it. A black sedan pulled into the lot. It looked out of place among the rusted sedans and work trucks. It rolled slowly past the rooms and stopped in front of number 12. The window rolled down. A man in a sharp grey suit extended a manila envelope. Liam Wayne? Yes. Courtesy of Mr. Julian Wayne. He didn't get out. He just held the envelope. I walked over and took it. The car accelerated immediately, tires screeching slightly on the asphalt, eager to get away from the contamination of my presence. I went back inside and ripped the envelope open. It was a document. Thick, heavy paper. Settlement agreement and release of all claims. I sat down and read it. Clause 1. Admission of liability. Liam Wayne admits to the mismanagement of funds totaling $480,000. Clause 2. Restitution. Liam Wayne agrees to relinquish all claims to any inheritance, property, or assets of the estate of Clara Wayne. Clause 3. Consideration. In exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution, the estate will provide a one-time relocation stipend of $20,000. Clause 4. Non-disclosure. Liam Wayne agrees to a lifetime silence regarding the estate, Julian Wayne, and all financial dealings of the Wayne family. $20,000. It was enough to move. Enough to rent an apartment in a different state. Enough to buy food. All I had to do was say I was a thief. All I had to do was admit that the last 3 years of my life, the 3 years I spent holding Clara's hand and wiping her chin, were a lie. I stared at the paper. My hand reached for the cheap ballpoint pen on the nightstand. Ben was right. I couldn't win. I had no money. I had no lawyer. I had no proof. Julian had the house, the records, the money, and the power. I uncapped the pen. The ink smelled like chemicals. I looked at the signature line. Liam Arthur Wayne. I touched the tip of the pen to the paper. A small dot of ink bled into the fiber. Then my phone buzzed again. It had rebooted itself. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't a notification. It was a calendar alert. November 15. Order tulips for spring. It was a recurring reminder I had set 2 years ago. Tulips. Clara loved tulips. But not just any tulips. She liked the Queen of Night, the black ones. They were rare, expensive. I remembered ordering them last year. I had paid cash because the vendor was an old Amish man who didn't take credit cards. I had driven 2 hours to get them. I closed my eyes, remembering that day. Clara was in the truck with me. It was one of her good days. She had sung along to the radio. We stopped for ice cream. Wait. I opened my eyes. We stopped for ice cream. At a gas station. I had paid for the gas with Clara's debit card. And I had paid for the ice cream with cash. I scrambled off the bed and grabbed my jacket. The dirty Carhartt jacket I had worn every day for 3 years. I dug into the pockets. Lint, a screw, a dried leaf. I checked the inside pocket. There was a tear in the lining. Things always fell down there. I pushed my fingers deep into the lining, feeling around the bottom hem of the jacket. Paper. Crinkled, soft, old paper. I pulled it out. It was a small wad of receipts matted together. I peeled them apart carefully. Most were faded to white nothingness. But one was still legible. Speedway Gas and Go. October 14, 2:15 p.m. Pump 4, $45. In-store, $6.50. 2 times vanilla cone. I stared at the date, October 14th. I grabbed the settlement agreement and flipped to the attached evidence schedule that Julian's lawyers had so helpfully provided to scare me. Exhibit A. List of suspicious cash withdrawals. I ran my finger down the list. October 14th. There it was. October 14, withdrawal $5,000. Location, ATM Mohegan Sun Casino. My heart stopped. Then it restarted, hammering against my ribs like a jackhammer. On October 14th at 2 p.m., Julian's spreadsheet claimed I was at a casino withdrawing $5,000. But at 2:15 p.m., I was at a gas station 200 miles away from that casino buying ice cream for my grandmother. And I had the receipt. I looked at the receipt again. It was flimsy. It was small. It was barely proof of anything other than ice cream. But it was a crack. A tiny hairline fracture in Julian's perfect fortress of lies. If he lied about this transaction, he lied about others. And if the withdrawals were happening at a casino while I was with Clara, then someone else had the card. Or a duplicate card. Who loved casinos? Who bragged about high stakes? I looked at the settlement agreement, specifically at Clause 4, non-disclosure. Why did he need me to be silent? If I was a thief, he should want to parade me through the town square. He should want a trial to show everyone how righteous he was. He didn't want a trial. He wanted me gone. He wanted me to sign this paper so the investigation would stop. Because if the investigation went deep, if a forensic accountant who wasn't on his payroll looked at the locations of the withdrawals, Julian wasn't trying to punish me. He was trying to bury me to save himself. I looked at the pen in my hand. Then I looked at the paper. I didn't sign it. I grabbed the paper with both hands and tore it in half. Then I tore the halves. The sound of ripping paper was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It sounded like a trellis snapping back into place. I wasn't going to take the 20,000. I wasn't going to move. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Ben. I didn't call the family. I opened the browser and searched for the name on the van I had seen at the estate. Sterling and Associates. Wait, no. Julian hired them. They were the enemy. I needed someone who hated Julian, or at least someone who hated bullies. I remembered a name, a judge my grandfather used to respect, a man who was retired now, but whose reputation was ironclad. No, I couldn't reach a judge. I needed to start smaller. I needed to get back into the house. I needed the garden log. In the chaos of packing, I had left the 2023 logbook in the greenhouse, tucked under the potting bench. I used it to track the pH levels of the soil. But Clara used to write in it too. I remembered something she wrote last month. Jay is asking about the signatures again. I told him the ink is dry. He didn't like that. If I could get that book. I walked to the window and looked out at my truck. It was old. It was ugly. But it was tough. Okay, Grandma, I whispered. We're not planting tulips this year. We're planting a lawsuit. I grabbed my keys. I wasn't the gardener anymore. I was the architect. And I was about to design the collapse of Julian Vane. The neon sign of the Blue Heron Motel flickered with a rhythmic, dying buzz. Bzz, bzz, darkness. Inside room 12, I had turned the cheap laminate desk into a war room. The map was drawn on the back of a pizza box I had fished out of the recycling bin. It was a schematic of the Vane estate drawn from memory. Every elevation, every drainage pipe, every blind spot in the perimeter fencing. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a detective. I was an architect. I solved problems by understanding structure. And right now, the structure of Julian's lie had a flaw. The timeline. I stared at the crumpled receipt from the gas station. October 14th. If Julian had fabricated the bank records to show a casino withdrawal on that day, he had likely done it by digital manipulation or by using a duplicate card he had procured years ago. He was a finance guy. He knew how to move numbers. But he didn't know the physical world. He didn't know that on October 14th, the traffic camera on Route 9 would have caught my truck. He didn't know that the ice cream shop had a CCTV system I had helped the owner install last summer. But the receipt wasn't enough. It was a shield, not a sword. To win, I needed a sword. I needed the garden log. It was a simple leather-bound notebook where I recorded soil pH levels, planting schedules, and pruning rotations. But Clara had started using the back pages as a diary when her hands were too shaky to hold her own journals. She wrote in it because she knew Julian never came into the greenhouse. He hated the humidity. It frizzes his hair. If Clara had written anything about the allowance she gave me, or her knowledge of Julian's pressure, it would be in that book. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. The estate had security now, tightened security. I had seen their patrols. But hired muscle looked for people walking on paths. They looked for cars on driveways. They didn't look for the guy who knew that the drainage culvert under the north wall was dry this time of year. I pulled on my dark hoodie and laced up my boots. They were still caked with the mud from Clara's grave. "Time to go to work," I whispered. I parked the truck 2 miles away, down an old logging road that hadn't been used since the 90s. I covered the windshield with branches to stop any reflection from the moon. The walk through the woods was brutal. The underbrush was thick, tearing at my clothes. The ground was freezing, a hard crust of frost over soft, sinking mud. But I knew these woods. I knew that the deer trail followed the ridgeline, keeping me out of sight of the main road. I reached the perimeter wall of the estate just after 1 a.m. The stone wall was 10 feet high, topped with wrought iron spikes. Formidable to an outsider, but to the man who had repointed the mortar joints 3 years ago, it was a ladder. I found the section near the old oak tree. The roots had shifted the foundation slightly, creating a gap in the stonework just wide enough for a boot toe. I climbed. My breathing was loud in my ears, a harsh rasp against the silence of the night. I pulled myself up, avoiding the spikes, and dropped down onto the soft mulch on the other side. I was in. The estate was unrecognizable in the dark. Or maybe it was too recognizable. It felt like walking into a house you grew up in, only to find strangers sleeping in your bed. Floodlights washed the main lawn in a stark prison yard white. I stayed in the shadows of the rhododendrons. I moved slowly, heel to toe. Roll the weight, don't snap the twigs. I saw a flashlight beam sweep across the driveway. A guard was walking a patrol route. He was smoking, the cherry of his cigarette bobbing in the dark. He was lazy. He wasn't checking the bushes. He was checking his phone. I waited for him to pass, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I slipped past the garage and headed for the greenhouse. It was located on the south side, attached to the main house but accessible from the garden. The glass structure loomed ahead, a skeleton of iron and glazing reflecting the moonlight. I reached the door. It was locked. I didn't panic. I knew this lock. It was a vintage brass mechanism, tricky if you forced it, compliant if you knew the sweet spot. I pulled a thin tension wrench, fashioned from a stiff piece of wire I'd brought, and a small pick from my pocket. Click, click, thunk. The door groaned. I froze, waiting for a siren. Nothing. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The air inside was warm and heavy, smelling of damp earth and chlorophyll. But there was something wrong. The smell was sour. I pulled out a small pen light and clicked it on, shielding the beam with my hand. I gasped. The greenhouse was a graveyard. The orchids I had spent 2 years cultivating were brown and shriveled. The automatic misting system was silent. The heating lamps were off. My eyes darted to the control panel on the wall. The main breaker had been pulled. To save money. Julian had turned off the power to the greenhouse. He had let everything die. The rare ferns, the hybrid roses, the starts for next spring's garden, all dead. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. It wasn't about the money. It was about the life. These plants were living things. They were Clara's joy. And he had killed them with the flip of a switch because they didn't show up as an asset on a balance sheet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into the house and strangle him. Focus, Liam. The book. I moved to the potting bench at the far end. It was covered in dead leaves and dry soil. I felt under the bottom shelf, where the wood had a false lip. My fingers brushed against something cool and smooth. Leather. I pulled it out. The Garden Log, 2023. I held it to my chest, closing my eyes. It was safe. I was about to turn and leave when I saw a light flick on in the main house. The library window looked directly into the greenhouse. I ducked behind the potting bench, my heart slamming into my throat. Through the glass, I saw 2 figures enter the library. One was Julian. He was wearing a silk robe, holding a tumbler of amber liquid. The other man was unfamiliar. Short, balding, wearing a rumpled suit even at this hour. He was pacing nervously. I crept closer to the connecting glass wall. I couldn't hear them. The double-pane insulation was too good. But I could see them clearly. Julian was laughing. He poured a drink for the small man. The man took it, his hands shaking. Julian walked over to the wall safe, the one behind the painting of great-grandfather Arthur. I knew the combination. Right 40, left 10, right 25. Clara's birthday. Julian opened it. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. He tossed them onto the desk. The small man picked them up, flipping through them frantically. He pointed at a page, arguing, gesturing wildly. Julian grabbed the man's shoulder. He said something. His face wasn't the charming face he showed the cameras. It was a snarl, a predator's face. The small man shrank back. He nodded. He took the papers and shoved them into his briefcase. Julian patted him on the cheek, a demeaning, patronizing gesture, and pointed to the door. What were those papers? The real will? The real bank statements? I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the angle was bad. The condensation on the greenhouse glass blurred the image. Then, the library door opened, and a third figure entered. It was a woman, tall, severe, wearing a Titan security uniform. She pointed toward the window, toward the greenhouse. She saw the light. My pen light. I had let a sliver of light escape when I checked the book. Julian turned, staring straight out into the darkness of the greenhouse. "Run!" my brain screamed. I scrambled back towards the garden door. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I cared about distance. I burst out of the greenhouse just as the library door to the garden flew open. "Hey!" a voice shouted. "Who's there?" A beam of high-powered tactical light sliced through the darkness, missing me by inches. I sprinted towards the tree line. "Intruder! South lawn!" The radio chatter erupted. I heard boots pounding on the flagstones. I didn't head for the wall I came in over. That was too far. I headed for the storm drain. It was a risky move. The drain emptied into the creek at the bottom of the hill. It was a narrow concrete pipe, barely 3 feet wide. I hit the wet grass, sliding on my knees, and scrambled into the muddy ditch. The pipe entrance was covered in vines. I tore them away and dove inside. The smell was awful, rotting leaves and stagnant water. I crawled on my hands and knees, the concrete scraping my skin. "Check the perimeter!" I heard the voices fading behind me. "Release the dogs!" Dogs. I crawled faster. The darkness was absolute. I counted the sections of pipe. 1, 2, 3. I burst out the other end, splashing into the icy water of the creek. I scrambled up the opposite bank, gasping for air, shivering uncontrollably. I was out. I lay in the mud for a moment, clutching the logbook inside my jacket. I had the book. And I had seen the fear on the small man's face. Julian wasn't secure. He was scrambling. Back at the motel, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The adrenaline was a toxic cocktail in my blood. I sat under the flickering bathroom light, drying the logbook with a hairdryer on the lowest setting. When the pages were dry enough to turn, I started reading. The first half was mundane. March 3. Prune the hydrangeas. pH 6.5, added lime. Then the handwriting began to change. As Clara's disease progressed, her writing became more jagged. But her thoughts in the garden, were always the clearest. June 12. Julian came today. He smells like expensive lies. He asked me to sign the papers again. He says the trust needs to be moved to the Cayman Islands for tax reasons. I told him my taxes are paid. He got angry. He threw the teacup Arthur gave me. I felt a chill. He had been aggressive with her? I flipped forward. September 20. Liam is worried about the roof. He tries to hide the bills from me, but I see them on the counter. He uses his own money for the groceries sometimes. He thinks I don't know. He is too proud to ask. I must protect him. The wolves are hungry. Tears pricked my eyes. She knew. She always knew. Then the entry from October 10, 4 days before the casino incident. October 10. I had a moment of clarity today. The fog lifted. I called Mr. Sterling, not the lawyer, the other one. The one who looks at numbers like I look at weeds. I told him about the papers Julian made me sign when I was confused. He told me to record everything. I don't know how to use the phone recorder, but I found the old dictaphone Arthur used for his memoirs. I put it in the soil bin, under the bags of potting mix. If I forget, I hope the gardener finds it. My breath caught in my throat. The soil bin. I had walked right past it tonight. It was in the greenhouse. The evidence, the voice of Clara herself, was still there, buried under the dirt I had just escaped from. I slammed my fist on the table. Damn it! I couldn't go back. Not now. The security would be tripled. They would be checking every inch of that greenhouse. But wait, Mr. Sterling. Not the lawyer, the other one. I grabbed my phone and searched Sterling again. Sterling and Associates, Forensic Accounting. CEO, Arthur Sterling. The man I saw on the van was a Sterling. But Clara said Mr. Sterling. I searched for Arthur Sterling. Obituary. Arthur Sterling Sr. passed away in 2019. No, that couldn't be right. I scrolled down. Honorable Justice Marcus Sterling, retired. Marcus Sterling. My grandfather's old golf partner. A retired federal judge. A man known as the Hammer for his disdain for white-collar crime. Clara hadn't called a forensic accountant. She had called a judge. Why would she call a judge? Because she didn't just want to audit Julian. She wanted to stop him. I looked at the date again. October 10th. If she spoke to Judge Sterling, he knew. He knew she was being coerced. But why hadn't he come forward? Because the will reading was private. Because he wasn't family. Because he didn't know she had died until the obituary was published yesterday. I looked at the clock. 4 a.m. I had the logbook, I had a name, and I had a destination. I wasn't going to go back to the greenhouse to dig in the dirt. I was going to go to the one place where dirt was exposed to the light, the courthouse. But first, I needed to survive the morning. My phone rang. It wasn't a number. It was unknown caller. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Liam? Julian's voice was smooth, but there was a razor edge to it. You left a mess in the greenhouse. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games. We found the mud. We found the lock-picked door. You're desperate, Liam, and desperate men make mistakes. I'm not desperate, Julian. I'm just getting started. Are you? Because I just filed a police report for breaking and entering. The police are on their way to the motel. I tracked your phone. My blood ran cold. You have about 5 minutes, Julian laughed softly. Run, Gardner, run. I hung up. I threw the logbook into my bag. I grabbed my keys. I didn't check out. I ran out the door, jumping into the truck just as the distant wail of sirens cut through the morning mist. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires spinning on the wet asphalt. I couldn't go to the police. Julian owned the narrative there. I couldn't go back to the estate. I had to go to the city. I had to find Judge Sterling. But as I merged onto the highway, a black SUV pulled out from the side road. Tinted windows, no plates. Titan security. They weren't waiting for the police. They were hunting me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The old Ford truck shuddered as I pushed it past 70 miles per hour. Come on, old girl, I gritted out. One last ride. This wasn't a legal battle anymore. It was a chase. And I was driving a tractor in a Formula One race. I looked in the rearview mirror. The SUV was gaining. I needed a place to hide. A place where high-tech SUVs and city lawyers did know the rules. I swerved off the highway, taking the exit for Blackwood Ridge. The mountain roads. If they wanted a gardener, I'd take them into the weeds. The engine of the pickup truck groaned like a wounded beast. I was hurtling along at 70 miles an hour on the winding mountain road of the Blackwood Range. Thick fog rolled up from the valley, turning the road ahead into a hazy grey ribbon. In the rearview mirror, the black SUV of Titan Security was still glued to my tail. Their LED headlights sliced through the fog, blasting harsh, aggressive beams straight into the back of my neck. Come on, I shouted, slamming my fist against the steering wheel. Don't die on me now. I knew this road. 3 years ago, I'd driven through here to find the best river stones for Mrs. Clara's koi pond. I knew that after the next hairpin turn, there was a gravel road leading into an abandoned logging site. That was my only chance. I yanked the wheel hard to the left. The pickup skidded, its rear end swinging dangerously close to the cliff's edge. Tires ground against gravel, spraying mud and stones everywhere. The SUV behind me didn't expect the sudden turn. They slammed the brakes, skidded straight past the junction, and plowed into the grassy shoulder before they could regain control. I floored the gas. The pickup lunged forward, charging onto the rough dirt track that cut through the pine forest. Branches lashed against the windshield like whips. I turned off the headlights. Darkness swallowed everything. I drove by memory and the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. After 2 miles of forest road, I found it. A narrow ravine hidden behind thorny blackberry bushes. I drove straight into the thicket, dry branches cracking loudly. The truck slid into a muddy pit and died. Silence. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding against my ribs. My breath condensed into white mist in the cold cabin air. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Far away on the main road, I saw headlights sweeping across the treetops. The roar of engines echoed, then faded. They'd lost me. But I knew they'd be back. They'd use thermal drones. They'd use tracking dogs. Julian had the money to buy all of that. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed the canvas bag containing the gardening journal, shoved the half-finished bottle of spring water into my jacket pocket, and opened the door. I stepped out. My mud-caked boots sank into the layer of rotting leaves. I was a landscape architect. I knew how soil breathed, how plants grew. But tonight, the forest wasn't a work of art. It was a refuge. I started walking north toward a small town called Jericho, 10 miles away through the woods. Dawn arrived the color of dull lead. I'd been walking for 6 hours. My legs were numb. The cold had seeped into my bones. Hunger twisted my stomach into knots. I reached the edge of the forest at 7 a.m. In front of me lay Jericho. A bleak stopover with a gas station, a shabby diner, and a few rows of wooden houses. I pulled my hood low and kept my head down. I looked like a homeless man or a junkie. In Jericho, that didn't attract much attention. I stepped into the Rusty Spoon diner. The smell of burnt grease and cheap coffee hit my nose, making my stomach churn. I slid into the darkest corner booth, my back to the door. "What'll it be, buddy?" The owner, a large woman with dyed red hair, called out from behind the counter. "Black coffee and toast." My voice rasped. "Cash only. Card machine's busted." "Okay." I dug out my last crumpled $10 bill. When she set the coffee down, her eyes narrowed as she studied me. I held my breath. Did she recognize me? She just jerked her chin towards the TV on the wall. "Weather's awful, huh?" I looked up. The local morning news. A red headline scrolled across the screen. "Wanted. Liam Vane. Suspect in fraud and break-in." My face appeared. Not the grainy photo from yesterday, but my official ID picture. The field reporter stood outside the gates of the Vane estate. Police say Liam Vane, nephew of the late businesswoman Clara Vane, fled after being discovered breaking into the mansion last night. Family representative Julian Vane warns that the suspect may be armed and mentally unstable. Armed? I had nothing but a notebook and a lifetime of resentment. Julian was going all in. He wanted the cops to shoot me before I could say a word. I lowered my face to the coffee cup, steam warming my skin. I had to leave. But where? I needed an ally. I opened the gardening journal, hiding it beneath the menu, and flipped quickly through the pages. August 15th. Elena was fired today. Julian accused her of stealing silverware. A vile lie. She saw him force me to sign documents while I was delirious. She tried to stop him. He fired her to silence her. I secretly gave her an envelope. I hope she's doing well. Elena. Elena Rodriguez, the loyal housekeeper who'd worked for her 15 years. The woman who always brewed ginger tea for me when I worked outside in the rain. I remembered she lived in a cheap motel in the neighboring town. I didn't have her number. But I remembered her son worked as a mechanic at Mike's Auto, right here in Jericho. I drained the coffee, left the bill on the table, and hurried out. Mike's Auto sat at the edge of town. The air reeked of oil and grease, punctuated by the sharp rattle of impact wrenches. I found Elena's son, Matteo, crouched under an old pickup. Matteo? He slid out from under the truck, wiping greasy hands on a rag, squinting at me. Who are you? I'm Liam. Liam Vane. His eyes widened. He stepped back, grabbing a heavy wrench from the workbench. You. The cops are looking for you. You stole money from Mrs. Clara. No, Matteo. Listen to me. I raised my hands. You know me. You fixed my lawnmower before. You saw how I took care of her. Matteo hesitated, studying my wrecked appearance, the dark circles under my eyes. The news says you ran off with millions, he spat. You don't look like a millionaire. Because I didn't take a cent. Julian's setting me up. He fired your mother for the same reason, didn't he? At the mention of Elena, Matteo froze. He lowered the wrench. My mom cried for 2 weeks after she got fired, he muttered. She said Julian was a devil. I need to see her, right now. She's the only one who knows what really happened in Mrs. Clara's final days. Matteo glanced around the shop. No one was watching. She's cleaning rooms at the Starlight Motel, 2 blocks from here. Room 104. We're staying there for now. Thank you. I turned to leave. Hey, Liam, Matteo called after me. If you hurt my mom, I'll kill you. I'll protect her, I said, and I meant it. The Starlight Motel was even worse than my old Blue Heron. I knocked on the door to room 104. 3 soft knocks, 2 hard ones. Elena's old signal. The door cracked open, the safety chain still latched. Elena's anxious brown eyes appeared in the gap. When she saw me, her mouth fell open. Mr. Liam? Elena, I need help. She hurriedly unchained the door, pulled me inside and locked it again. The tiny room smelled of bleach and instant noodles. My God, look at you, she gasped. They said on TV, they said you're a criminal. I didn't do anything, Elena. You know that. I know. She nodded fiercely, tears welling up. Mrs. Clara loved you most. Even when she was delirious, she always asked, Where's Liam? Has Liam eaten enough? Every day. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard. Elena, I found her journal. She wrote that Julian fired you because you saw him force her to sign papers. Elena shuddered, sitting on the edge of the bed, hands clenched white. That day, there was a storm, she whispered. You were outside fixing the fence. Mr. Julian came with a strange man. They gave her a thick stack of papers. She didn't want to sign. She cried. She said, This isn't my handwriting. But Julian grabbed her hand, forced her to hold the pen. Can you testify? I pressed. In court? Elena lowered her head, shoulders trembling. I'm terrified, Mr. Liam. Julian, he has dangerous friends. After I was fired, someone threw stones through our window. They left a note. Stay silent or disappear. That's why we're hiding here. I sat on the floor across from her. I understand, I said gently. But if we do nothing, he wins. He erases everything about Mrs. Clara. He turns her into a cash machine, and me into a criminal. Elena looked up, torn between fear and loyalty. Suddenly, she stood and went to the rickety wardrobe, pulling out an old, frayed handbag. From its lining, she took out a smartphone with a cracked screen. "I'm not educated, Mr. Liam," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "But I know evil when I see it. That day, when they forced her to sign, I was watching through the door crack. I was afraid they'd hurt her." She powered on the phone. I recorded the video. My heart skipped a beat. "You recorded it?" "Only 10 seconds. My hands were shaking, but there's footage. And there's sound." She handed me the phone. I pressed play. The video was blurry, violently shaky, shot through a narrow gap. But the audio was clear. Julian's voice, cold and cruel. "Sign it, you senile old woman. If you don't, I'll throw Liam out on the street. I'll burn his garden to the ground." And Mrs. Clara's weak, sobbing reply, Don't hurt his flowers, please." The video ended. I sat frozen. Hot tears streamed down my face without me realizing. He wasn't just greedy. He was a monster. He'd used me and the garden as hostages. She signed to protect me. Rage flared inside me, no longer a spark but a wildfire, burning away fear and hesitation. "Elena," I said, my voice low and frightening even to myself. This is a nuclear weapon." "But how do we bring it into the open?" she asked. "The police are hunting you. If you step outside, they'll arrest you and seize the phone." She was right. I couldn't go to the police. The local chief played golf with Julian's father. This evidence would accidentally disappear. I needed someone above them, someone Julian couldn't buy. I remembered a name from the journal, Judge Marcus Sterling. I pulled out my phone, the one I turned off the night before, and powered it on. Hundreds of missed calls and messages. I ignored them and searched for Marcus Sterling's home address. He lived in a secluded hillside estate, 30 miles away. "Elena," I stood up. "I need to borrow Mateo's car, and I need you to come with me." "Where?" "To the only man who can hear Mrs. Clara's voice from beyond the grave." We left the auto shop in Mateo's 2005 Honda Civic. It rattled and shook, but it wasn't my wanted pickup. Elena sat in the passenger seat, clutching the cracked phone like the Holy Grail. We drove out of town toward the western hills. As we merged onto the highway, a grey sedan suddenly cut in front of us, forcing us onto the shoulder. "Watch out!" Elena screamed. I slammed the brakes. Tires shrieked. We stopped inches from the sedan's bumper. The sedan's door opened. Not police, not Titan security. An elderly man stepped out, silver-bearded, wearing a weathered fishing jacket and a baseball cap, leaning on an oak cane. But his eyes, sharp and bright as surgical blades. He walked to my window and tapped lightly with the cane. I rolled it down, heart pounding. "Who are you?" He squinted at me, then at Elena. "You drive terribly, Liam," he said, his voice rough but commanding. "Mrs. Clara always said you had skilled hands, but you handle a steering wheel like a pickaxe." I stared at him. "How do you know?" "I've been following you since you left the Starlight Motel," he cut in. "I'm Marcus Sterling. Judge Sterling, in the flesh." "Why are you looking for me?" I asked, relief and suspicion colliding. "Because," Sterling said quietly, "this morning, Julian Vane filed an emergency request to have Mrs. Clara's body cremated. He wants to destroy any remaining medical evidence." Elena's face went pale. "He's in a hurry," Sterling continued. And when your enemy rushes, that's when you strike. He opened my back door and climbed in without ceremony. Drive. Don't go to my house. It's being watched. We're going to the courthouse. The courthouse? I stammered. But I'm wanted. Exactly, Sterling smiled, a smile devoid of kindness and full of cunning. That's how we get inside. You're not going there to file a lawsuit. You're going there to surrender. Surrender? Trust me. Sterling patted my shoulder. The will hearing is tomorrow. Fast-tracked at Julian's request to freeze the estate. You'll be there, not as a defendant, but as a witness to your own case. He pointed ahead. Let's go. Your garden is about to face a very big storm. The back seat of Matteo's Honda Civic was cramped, smelling of stale French fries and motor oil. But the presence of Judge Sterling made it feel like a war room. Turn left here, Sterling commanded, pointing his cane at a dirt turnoff. We need to go in through the back roads. The police scanners are buzzing with your name, Liam. Why am I surrendering? I asked, gripping the headrest of the front seat. If I go to jail, I can't fight him. If you don't go to jail today, there won't be a fight, Sterling said, his eyes fixed on the passing tree line. Julian filed an ex parte motion this morning. He claims the estate is hemorrhaging money due to your theft and wants immediate executive power to liquidate assets, including the cremation of the body. Cremation? I choked out. Grandma wanted to be buried. She bought the plot next to Grandpa 30 years ago. Exactly, Sterling nodded grimly. Julian wants her ash because ash tells no tales. No toxicology reports. No evidence of over-sedation. My blood ran cold. You think he drugged her? I think Julian is a man who solves problems, Sterling said. And Clara's lucidity was a problem. But we can't prove that yet. What we can do is stop the clock. If you surrender, you become a material party to the criminal investigation. I can file an emergency injunction on behalf of a defendant seeking exculpatory evidence. It freezes the body. It freezes the assets. He looked at me, his gaze piercing. It's a gambit, son. You have to walk into the cage so I can lock the door with him inside. I looked at Elena in the front seat. She was clutching her phone, her knuckles white. What about Elena? I asked. She stays with me, Sterling said. She is the witness X. Julian doesn't know she exists. If he sees her, he'll find a way to discredit her before morning. She goes into hiding at my safe house until the hearing. I took a deep breath. It felt like inhaling broken glass. Okay, I said. Let's do it. The Jericho County Sheriff's Department was a brick block of a building that smelled of floor wax and misery. We parked 2 blocks away. Sterling handed me a business card. On the back, handwritten in elegant script, was a phone number. You invoke your right to counsel, Sterling instructed. You say nothing, you sign nothing. You give them this card. It belongs to a defense attorney who owes me a favor. He'll keep the wolves at bay for 24 hours. And then? And then, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., the hearing begins. I will see you there. I stepped out of the car. I looked back at Elena. She gave me a tearful nod. Be the stone wall, Liam, she whispered. I walked toward the station. The moment I stepped into the lobby, the atmosphere shifted. The desk sergeant looked up, bored. Then his eyes widened. He reached for his radio. I'm Liam Vane, I said, raising my hands. I hear you're looking for me. Chaos erupted. 3 officers swarmed out from the back, hands on their holsters. On the ground, now! I knelt on the cold linoleum. I felt the heavy weight of a knee in my back. The click of handcuffs was loud and final. Liam Wayne, you are under arrest for grand larceny, elder abuse, and breaking and entering. As they hauled me up, I saw a flash of light through the glass doors. A news van had just pulled up. Julian's PR machine was faster than the police. They paraded me out the side door for the perp walk. Cameras clicked furiously. Reporters shouted questions. Liam, did you steal the money for gambling? Liam, do you have any remorse? I kept my head up. I looked straight into the camera lens. I wasn't hiding anymore. The holding cell was a concrete box, 6 feet by 8 feet. A stainless steel toilet, a wooden bench, and graffiti scratched into the gray paint. Time is the killer. I sat on the bench, staring at that phrase. Hours passed. My shoelaces and belt had been taken. I felt stripped, not just of my clothes, but of my humanity. The door buzzed. A guard appeared. Vane, visitor. Is it my lawyer? The guard didn't answer. He handcuffed me again and led me to a small interrogation room. Sitting at the metal table wasn't a lawyer. It was Julian. He looked impeccable. Navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, a silk tie that probably cost more than my truck. He was looking at a file folder, looking bored. The guard left us alone. You're not supposed to be here, I said, sitting down opposite him. I'm the victim, Julian smiled, a thin, razor-sharp expression. Victims are allowed to confront their abusers. It's part of the healing process. He closed the file. You look terrible, Liam. Jail doesn't suit you. You're too soft. I'm not signing anything, Julian. Oh, I know, he sighed, leaning back. The defiant stage. It's adorable. But let's look at the reality. You have a public defender. I have a team of sharks. You have a receipt for ice cream. I have bank statements showing withdrawals from accounts you controlled. Accounts you manipulated, I shot back. I saw the man in the library, Julian. I saw the papers. For a split second, his eyes flickered, but he recovered instantly. Hallucinations, he dismissed. Stress-induced psychosis. Another tragedy. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Here is the offer, Liam. The final offer. Because despite everything, you're family. He slid a paper across the table. Plead guilty to a lesser charge. Misappropriation of funds. No jail time. Probation. And I will set up a small trust for you. $50,000. You leave the state, you never come back. Why? I asked. If you have me nailed, why offer a deal? Because trials are messy, Julian said, inspecting his manicured fingernails. They air dirty laundry. Grandma's dementia, her decline. It's undignified to discuss it in public. I want to protect her legacy. You want to cremate her legacy, I said, so no one finds out what you did to her. Julian froze. He looked at me and the charm evaporated completely. What was left was something cold and reptilian. She was gone years ago, Liam, he hissed. That thing in the bed? That wasn't Clara. It was a husk, a drain on resources. I didn't kill her. I just stopped the bleeding. You stopped her heart. I managed the portfolio. Julian slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain that estate? The taxes? The upkeep? She was burning through capital to keep a pile of rocks and weeds alive. I saved the family fortune. You saved it for yourself. Julian stood up, smoothing his jacket. He regained his composure, but his eyes remained deadly. Tomorrow morning, at the hearing, I will present the evidence. The judge will grant me full executorship. By noon, she will be cremated. By sunset, the estate will be listed for sale. And you will be rotting in a cell for 10 years. He walked to the door and knocked for the guard. Think about the deal, Liam.
50,000.
Or 10 years. It's just math. He left. I sat alone in the silence. It's just math. That's all it ever was to him. Numbers, assets, liabilities. But he was wrong. I looked at my hands. Dirty, calloused hands. Gardening isn't math. It's biology. It's chaos. It's resilience. You can bury a seed under 10 feet of concrete and it will still find a crack. It will still find the light. I wasn't going to take the deal. Night fell in the cell block. It was never truly dark, just a dim, buzzing twilight. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's face in the video. Don't hurt his flowers. She had sacrificed her dignity to protect my garden. I lay on the hard bunk, staring at the ceiling. Doubt crept in. Not the doubt of guilt, but the doubt of capability. Could Sterling really pull this off? He was an old man, retired for years. Was his favor with the defense attorney real? Was Elena safe? What if Julian found her? What if I walked into that courtroom tomorrow and stood alone? I felt small. I felt like the 10-year-old boy who hid in the greenhouse when his parents argued about money. Liam, Clara's voice echoed in my memory. Do you know why the rose has thorns? To hurt people? No, to protect the bloom. You have to be willing to prick your fingers if you want the beauty. I sat up. I squeezed my hands into fists until the nails bit into my palms. Let them come. Let Julian bring his sharks. Let him bring his forged papers. I had thorns now. 8 a.m., the next morning. The transport van rattled as it hit a pothole. I was chained to 3 other men in orange jumpsuits. We were heading to the county courthouse. My stomach was empty, knotted with nausea. We pulled into the underground Sallyport. The doors opened and the noise hit us instantly. Reporters, dozens of them. They were kept back by barriers, but their microphones were thrust forward like spears. Liam! Liam! I was shuffled off the van and into a holding cell adjacent to Courtroom 3B. My court-appointed lawyer, the one Sterling promised, was waiting. His name was Mr. Vance. He looked disheveled, young, and terrified. Mr. Vane, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, I got the file late last night. This is a heavy case. The prosecution is asking for a flight risk hold. No bail. Where is Judge Sterling? I asked. Who? Vance looked confused. The judge for this hearing is Judge Patterson. He's known for being tough on financial crimes. My heart sank. Where is Sterling? Did you get a call? I pressed. From Marcus Sterling? No, Vance shook his head. Look, Liam, the prosecutor is offering a plea deal. 5 years. If we take it now, no deals. Liam, please. The evidence list is huge. They have forensic audits. No. The bailiff opened the door. Vane, you're up. I walked into the courtroom. It was packed. The gallery was full of curious onlookers and Tress. In the front row, I saw my family. Aunt Sarah, Uncle Robert. They looked at me with mixture of shame and anger. At the plaintiff's table sat Julian. He was flanked by 3 lawyers in grey suits. They looked like a phalanx of soldiers. Julian didn't look at me. He was staring straight ahead at the judge's bench, a look of pious determination on his face. I was led to the defendant's table. Mr. Vance sat next to me, fumbling with his papers. All rise. Judge Patterson entered. He was a large man with a red face and no-nonsense demeanor. Docket number 4055, Estate of Clara Vane versus Liam Vane. Emergency motion for executor powers and asset freeze. Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor, Julian's lead lawyer boomed. Ready for the defense, Vance squeaked. Judge Patterson peered over his glasses at me. Mr. Vane, you are currently in custody for charges related to this estate. This does not look good. Your Honor, Julian's lawyer stood up. We are asking for immediate relief. The estate is bleeding. The defendant has already attempted to flee the jurisdiction. We need to secure the assets and finalize the funeral arrangements for the deceased. Granted. Patterson reached for his gavel. Unless there is a compelling reason not to. My heart stopped. He was going to rule right now, before we even started. Your Honor! The voice boomed from the back of the courtroom. It wasn't Vance. The double doors swung open. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing a lawyer's suit. He was wearing a tweed jacket and leaning on a cane. But the air in the room seemed to change instantly. The bailiff straightened up. The court reporter stopped typing. It was Marcus Sterling. And walking beside him, head held high in a simple floral dress, was Elena. Who interrupts my court? Judge Patterson barked. A friend of the court, Sterling said, his voice calm but filling the room, and a witness to a felony in progress. Julian spun around in his chair. His face went pale. Sterling walked down the center aisle, the tap, tap, tap of his cane echoing like a metronome, counting down Julian's time. Justice Patterson? Sterling nodded respectfully. I believe you have an empty chair at the witness stand, and I have the woman who needs to fill it. Order! Judge Patterson slammed his gavel, the sound cracking through the murmurs of the courtroom like a pistol shot. This is a court of law, not a theatre. Mr. Sterling, you have exactly 30 seconds to explain why you are disrupting my proceedings before I hold you in contempt. Marcus Sterling didn't flinch. He walked to the railing, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor. He looked less like a retired judge and more like an old lion who had decided to roar one last time. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice gravelly but distinct. You are about to grant an emergency order based on a fraudulent narrative. The plaintiff claims the deceased was mentally incompetent when it suited him and competent when she signed checks to his accounts. I have a witness who can prove that the incompetence was manufactured and the consent was coerced. Julian's lead attorney, a man named Mr. Thorne with a shark smile, shot out of his chair. Objection! This is an ambush. This witness is not on the list. We have had no discovery. Mr. Sterling has no standing in this case. The witness is a former employee of the estate, Sterling countered calmly. Her name is Elena Rodriguez, and she was fired specifically to prevent her from being here today. Judge Patterson looked at Julian. Julian remained seated, his face a mask of polite confusion. But I saw his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. I will allow a voir dire, Patterson ruled, leaning back. Briefly, if this is a waste of time, Mr. Sterling, I will have you escorted out by the bailiffs. Take the stand, Mrs. Rodriguez, Sterling gestured. Elena walked past me. She was trembling. She looked small in the witness box, surrounded by dark wood and hostile eyes. Sterling didn't act as a lawyer. He acted as a guide. He stood near her, offering a silent support. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sterling asked, why did you leave the Vane employment? I was fired, Elena whispered. Speak up, please, the judge said. I was fired! Elena's voice cracked, then strengthened. By him! She pointed a shaking finger at Julian. And why were you told you were fired? He said I stole silverware. But I didn't. I never took a thing. He fired me because I walked into the study while he was holding Mrs. Clara's hand to the paper. A hush fell over the room. Holding her hand to the paper? Sterling repeated. You mean assisting her? No! Elena shook her head vigorously. Forcing her! She was crying. She was saying, no, Julian, please. And he was saying... She stopped, looking terrified at Julian. What was he saying, Elena? I whispered from my table, earning a sharp glare from the bailiff. He was saying... Elena took a deep breath. Sign it or the gardener pays. I closed my eyes. The guilt washed over me. She had protected me. Even in her confusion, her instinct was to shield me. Objection! Thorne shouted. Hearsay! This is the vengeful rambling of a disgruntled servant who was caught stealing. I have proof, Elena said suddenly. She looked at me, then at the judge. I have a video. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. Julian's face went grey. I offer into evidence. Sterling pulled a flash drive from his pocket. He had transferred the file in the car. Defense Exhibit A. A digital recording dated October 10th. Play it, Judge Patterson ordered. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. The video was shaky, dark. It showed a sliver of the study through a crack in the door. Sign it, you old hag. Julian's voice, distorted but recognizable, snarled from the speakers. My flowers. Clara's voice was a sob. Forget the flowers. Sign the power of attorney, or Liam goes to jail for theft. I'll frame him, Grandma. I'll plant the evidence myself. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. I looked at Julian. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at his lawyer, his eyes wide with a primal panic. Then Mr. Thorne stood up. He didn't look panicked. He looked bored. Your Honor, Thorne said, smoothing his tie, we object to the admission of this video. On what grounds? Patterson asked, clearly disgusted by what he had just heard. It seems pretty clear to me. Authentication, Thorne said, and the Illinois two-party consent law. This is an illegal recording made in a private residence without the knowledge of the parties involved. It is inadmissible in a civil court. Furthermore, Thorne paused, pulling a document from his briefcase. We have a sworn affidavit from a digital forensics expert, prepared just now, given the predictability of deepfake technology, stating that audio clips of high-profile individuals, like my client, are easily manufactured. This video shows no faces clearly, just a back and a voice. In the age of AI, Your Honor, this is not evidence. It's a cartoon. It's not AI! I shouted, standing up. It's the truth! Sit down, Mr. Vane, the judge barked. Patterson rubbed his temples. He looked at the video, then at the statute book on his desk. Mr. Sterling, Patterson said heavily. Mr. Thorne is technically correct regarding the Two-Party Consent Act. Without a warrant, a surreptitious recording in a private home is problematic. And the quality, he squinted. It is very dark. It establishes motive, Your Honor, Sterling argued, his voice rising. It establishes a pattern of abuse. It establishes that the defense is desperate, Thorne cut in smoothly. Your Honor, my client is a grieving grandson trying to manage a chaotic estate. This video is a distraction, a fabrication. Judge Patterson looked at Elena, who was crying silently. Then he looked at Julian, who had composed himself into a portrait of wounded dignity. I cannot admit the video into evidence, Patterson ruled. My heart shattered. I felt physically sick. The truth was right there, playing on a screen, and the law just blinked and turned away. However, Patterson continued, his eyes narrowing at Julian, I am not deaf, and I am not stupid. He turned to the clerk. I am denying the plaintiff's request for immediate cremation. The body of Clara Vane will be held in the county morgue pending a full autopsy and toxicology report. Julian flinched. That hit him. And, Patterson continued, I am denying the defendant's request to dismiss the charges. Mr. Liam Vane, you are still facing grand larceny, but I am releasing you on your own recognizance, provided you surrender your passport and stay within the county. What about the house? Thorne asked. My client is the executor. The executorship stands, Patterson said, until proven otherwise. Julian Vane retains control of the estate, but all assets are frozen. No sales, no transfers. Thank you, Your Honor, Thorne smiled. It was a victory for them. Freezing the assets didn't matter to Julian. Controlling the house mattered. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. It sounded like a coffin lid closing. The chaos of the post-hearing hallway was a blur. Reporters shouted questions I couldn't hear. Sterling guided Elena and me through the crowd, using his cane to part the sea of microphones. We found a quiet corner near the exit. We lost, I said, leaning against the cold marble wall. He's still in the house. He has the keys. He has the records. We didn't lose, Sterling corrected, though he looked tired. We bought time. The autopsy will show the sedatives. That will prove abuse. That takes weeks, I said. Julian won't wait weeks. Did you see his face when you mentioned the toxicology? He's scared, and scared men destroy evidence. He can't sell the house, Elena said, wiping her eyes. He doesn't need to sell it, I realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity. He needs to sanitize it. I looked across the lobby. Julian was standing by the elevators, surrounded by his legal team. He looked up and saw me. He said something to his lawyers, then walked over to us alone. He stopped 5 feet away. The arrogance was back, but it was brittle now. Harder. Nice try with the video, Julian said softly. Grandma always did have a dramatic flair. You killed her, I said. Maybe not with a knife, but you killed her. She was old, Liam. Things break. People break. He adjusted his cufflinks. The judge said I control the estate. That means I control the premises. I'm going to do some spring cleaning, starting with that disgusting greenhouse. It's a fire hazard, you know, old wiring. My stomach dropped. The greenhouse. If you touch that greenhouse, I stepped forward. What? Julian smirked. You'll hit me and go to jail for assault? Go ahead. Make it easy for me. He leaned in close. I'm going to pave it over, Liam. I'm going to put a swimming pool right where she grew her prize roses. And every time I swim, I'll think of you. He turned and walked away. He's going to burn it, I said to Sterling. He knows about the soil bin. He knows there might be more records. He's going to burn the greenhouse down and blame it on faulty wiring. If he does, he destroys the crime scene, Sterling said. It's risky. He's past risky, I said. He's desperate. He's going to do it tonight. You can't go there, Liam, Sterling warned, gripping my arm. The judge was clear. If you set foot on that property, you violate your bail. You go to prison immediately. Do not be a martyr. So I just let him burn her memory? We wait for the autopsy, Sterling insisted. We fight with paper. Paper burns, I said. I pulled away from him. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding midday sun. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove Matteo's Civic to a ridge overlooking the valley where the Vane estate lay. I sat on the hood of the car, watching the house through a pair of cheap binoculars I found in the glove box. It was 4 p.m. I saw the trucks arrive, not moving trucks, shredding trucks. A mobile document destruction service. Assets are frozen, I muttered, but trash isn't. He was shredding the physical files. The lack of invoices he accused me of? He was creating it right now. He was destroying the receipts I had carefully filed for 3 years. He was erasing my defense. And then I saw the Titan security guards moving toward the greenhouse. They were carrying red cans, gasoline. My breath hitched. He wasn't waiting for nightfall, and he was going to do it now, claiming it was an accident during the cleanup. I looked at the phone in my hand. I could call the police, but by the time they got through the gate, by the time they argued with the lawyers about private property and controlled burns of yard waste, the greenhouse would be ash. The garden log in my bag felt heavy. It was the only piece of Clara left, but it wasn't enough. The garden log proved I was innocent of stealing cash, but it didn't prove Julian was guilty of murder. The proof of murder, the stash of sedative bottles I suspected he hid, the real medical charts he stole from the nurse, might still be in there. Or maybe he just wanted to destroy the one place Clara loved, the final act of spite against a woman who refused to give him everything. I put the binoculars down. Sterling said to be a stone wall, but a wall just stands there, while the fire burns against it. Clara didn't tell me to be a wall. She told me to be a gardener. Weeds will always try to take over, Liam. You have to pull them out by the root. I looked at the estate. The sun was dipping low, casting long, blood-red shadows across the valley. I started the car. I wasn't going to the front gate. I wasn't going to the wall I climbed last night. I was going to the service entrance, the old delivery road that led directly to the boiler room beneath the greenhouse. The tunnel Clara and Arthur used to smuggle rum during Prohibition. A family secret they never told Julian. I was breaking bail. I was breaking the law. But if I didn't stop him, the truth would turn to smoke. I floored the gas pedal. The Civic roared, heading down the mountain. Scene: the estate, perimeter. I parked the car in the ditch a mile out and ran. My suit from court was restrictive, so I shed the jacket and tie, running in my dress shirt. The wind bit through the thin fabric. I found the entrance to the old tunnel. It was covered by a thicket of blackberry bushes. I tore through them, not caring about the thorns ripping my skin. Blood welled on my arms, mixing with the sweat. I found the heavy iron hatch. It was rusted shut. "Come on," I grunted, grabbing a heavy rock. I smashed the locking mechanism. Once, twice, sparks flew. On the third strike, the metal groaned and gave way. I pulled the hatch open. A blast of cold, stale air hit me. I dropped into the darkness. I ran through the narrow tunnel, crouching low. I knew the layout by heart. 30 yards to the junction. Left turn to the main house basement. Right turn to the greenhouse boiler room. I went right. I could hear footsteps above me, heavy boots on the metal grating of the greenhouse floor. "Pour it on the benches," a voice commanded. It was Julian. "Make it look like the heater exploded." "What about the plants?" a guard asked. "Who cares? Burn them." I reached the ladder leading up to the boiler room. I climbed, pushing the trapdoor open slowly. I emerged behind the massive industrial furnace. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline. I peeked around the boiler. Julian was standing in the center of the greenhouse. He was holding a silver lighter, Clara's lighter. 2 guards were dousing the withered remains of the orchids with gas. Such a shame, Julian said, flipping the lighter lid open and closed. Clink, clink. Tragic electrical fire destroys historic garden. The insurance payout will be substantial. He raised the lighter. Hey! I stepped out from behind the boiler. I didn't have a weapon. I just had my voice and my rage. Julian spun around. He looked shocked, then amused. Liam, he smiled, though his eyes were dead. You just violated a restraining order. You're going to prison for a long time. Maybe, I said, walking steadily towards him. But you're not burning this place. Who's going to stop me? Julian laughed. You? Look at you, you're shaking. I'm not shaking, I said. I'm vibrating. I looked at the guards. He's committing arson, insurance fraud, and destruction of evidence in a federal investigation. If you light that match, you're accomplices. Judge Sterling knows I'm here. He knows you are here. The guards hesitated. They looked at each other. They were hired muscle, not suicidal loyalists. Don't listen to him, Julian screamed, his composure cracking. I pay you. Light it. The guard holding the gas can took a step back. I ain't going down for arson, Mr. Vane. Not with the judge involved. He dropped the can. Cowards! Julian shrieked. He turned back to me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. Fine, he hissed. I'll do it myself. He struck the lighter. The flame flared up, orange and hungry. He looked at the puddle of gasoline at his feet. No! I lunged. Julian threw the lighter. It tumbled through the air in slow motion, a spinning coin of fire. I dove. Not at Julian, at the lighter. I caught it in midair, my hand closing around the hot metal flame. Ideally, I would have extinguished it, but the momentum carried me forward. I slammed into the hard potting bench. My hand burned. I gasped, dropping the lighter. It hit the floor, but it landed on a patch of wet concrete, missing the gasoline by inches. The flame sputtered and went out. Silence. I lay on the floor, panting, clutching my burned hand. Julian stared at the extinguished lighter. Then he looked at me. He reached into his jacket pocket. I thought he was going for another lighter. He pulled out a gun, a small pearl-handled pistol, Arthur's pistol. You really are a pest, Liam, Julian whispered. He aimed the gun at my chest. You just don't know when to die. The guards had fled. It was just me and him. You won't shoot, I said, struggling to my knees. Too loud, too messy. Self-defense, Julian said, his hand trembling slightly. Intruder breaks in, threatens me. I feared for my life. It's clean. He cocked the hammer. Goodbye, gardener. Crash! The glass roof of the greenhouse shattered inward. Not from an explosion, but from a drone. A heavy industrial camera drone crashed through the pane and hovered, buzzing angrily like a giant hornet, right between me and Julian. A voice amplified from the drone speaker boomed out. Drop the weapon, Julian Vane. This is being live-streamed to the state police. Julian looked up, blinded by the drone spotlight. I didn't wait. I tackled him. We hit the floor hard. The gun skittered away, sliding under the benches. Julian fought like a cat, scratching and biting. But he was soft. He had spent his life in boardrooms. I had spent mine wrestling oak roots and hauling stone. I pinned him down, my forearm against his throat. It's over, Julian, I panted, sweat dripping onto his terrified face. The weeds are pulled. Sirens. Real sirens this time. Not one or two, a dozen. They were screaming up the driveway. I looked up at the drone hovering above us. Through the shattered roof, I saw the night sky. and for a second, I thought I smelled lavender. The silence that followed the sirens was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The greenhouse was bathed in the strobe light chaos of red and blue. State troopers swarmed the property, their boots crunching on the glass shards of the shattered roof. I was sitting on the edge of a potting bench, a paramedic wrapping my burned hand in cool, wet gauze. I didn't feel the pain. I felt a strange, hollow numbness. Across the room, Julian was in handcuffs. He wasn't screaming anymore. He wasn't straightening his tie. He was slumped against the boiler he had tried to explode. His face smeared with soot and sweat. He looked small. Without his suit jacket, without his lawyers, without his arrogance, he was just a man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. A trooper led him past me toward the exit. Julian stopped. He looked at me. His eyes were empty, dead things. "You ruined it," he whispered, his voice raspy from the smoke. "It was perfect. The numbers balanced. You ruined it." "The numbers balanced," I said, my voice flat. "But the equation was wrong." "Get moving," the trooper barked, shoving him forward. I watched him go. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt tired. Judge Sterling walked over, navigating the debris with his cane. Beside him was Mateo, holding a large industrial remote control. "Nice flying, kid," I said to Mateo. Mateo grinned, though his hands were shaking. "I used to race drones in the quarry. When the judge called and said we needed eyes in the sky, well, I figured the Sky Hunter 3000 needed a field test." "You saved my life," I said. "We're even," Mateo nodded. "For my mom." Sterling placed a hand on my uninjured shoulder. "The police have secured the house. They found the accelerant cans in Julian's trunk. The self-defense plea is dead on arrival. The live stream showed him holding the lighter, not you." "What happens now?" I asked, looking around the ruined greenhouse. The orchids were trampled. The glass was gone. It was a skeleton of what it used to be. "Now," Sterling said, "we let the law do the weeding. And we find out exactly what he was trying so hard to burn." The next 48 hours were a blur of statements, medical checks, and lawyers. But this time, the lawyers were on my side. Because of the high profile of the arrest, the live stream had been picked up by national news, the district attorney took over personally. Julian was denied bail, flight risk, danger to the community. I was cleared of all charges. The breaking and entering was dismissed as a lawful attempt to prevent a felony, arson. I returned to the estate 2 days later. It was quiet. The Titan security guards were gone, replaced by a single sheriff's deputy parked at the gate to keep the curious onlookers away. I walked into the main house. It was cold. The heating had been turned off to preserve the crime scene status of the basement. But the upper floors were accessible. I walked into the kitchen. There was a half-eaten apple on the counter, Julian's. A stack of mail on the table, Julian's. I picked up a heavy envelope. It was from a private jet charter company. Quote for one-way flight to Zurich. He really was leaving. He was going to burn the house, collect the insurance, and vanish before the audit could be completed. "Liam?" I turned. Standing in the kitchen doorway was Aunt Sarah, and behind her, Uncle Robert. They looked sheepish, uncomfortable. Aunt Sarah was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. We heard you were released," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I brought you some lasagna. I know you like lasagna." I looked at the dish. Then I looked at her. 3 days ago," I said calmly, "you stood in a courtroom and watched Julian call me a thief. You didn't look at me then." We were deceived, Liam. Uncle Robert stepped forward, his face flushed. Julian, he showed us papers, spreadsheets. He told us you were gambling away Clara's money. How were we to know? You could have asked me, I said. You could have visited her once in 3 years. Robert looked down at his shoes. We're family, Liam, Sarah pleaded. We have to stick together now. The scandal, it's ruining the Vane name. We need to present a united front. A united front? I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Yes, Robert said eagerly. We've been talking. Since Julian is incapacitated, we need a new executor. We think it should be you. You know the house. You can prepare it for the sale. The sale? Well, yes, Sarah nodded. The estate is tainted now. The fire damage, the murder accusations. No one will want to live here. We should sell the land to developers, split the proceeds. It's what Clara would have wanted. I stared at them. They hadn't changed. Julian was the villain, yes, but they were the enablers. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the proceeds. They cared that the Vane name was embarrassed, not that Clara had been abused. Get out, I said. Liam, be reasonable. Get out. My voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of 3 years of solitude. Leave the lasagna on the porch if you want, but leave my house. It's not your house yet, Robert snapped, his mask slipping. The will hasn't been probated. You're just a beneficiary, same as us. We'll see, I said. I walked past them out the back door and into the garden. I needed to breathe. I found Judge Sterling in the library. He had set up a command center on Clara's desk. Boxes of files were stacked everywhere. These weren't the files Julian had shredded. These were the files the police had seized from Julian's downtown apartment and his safe deposit box. Tell me, I said, sitting down in the leather chair opposite him. Sterling looked up over his reading glasses. He looked grim. It's worse than we thought, Liam. He pushed a stack of papers towards me. Julian wasn't just stealing from Clara. He was using her accounts to launder money for his clients, high-risk investors who wanted their money cleaned. I picked up a sheet. It was a wire transfer record. Sender, Clara Vane Revocable Trust. Recipient, Shell Corp Alpha, Cayman Islands. Amount, $200,000. He moved the dirty money into her account, Sterling explained. Mixed it with her pension and dividends, and then moved it out as consulting fees or investments. He used your grandmother as a mule. And the withdrawals? I asked. The cash he blamed on me? That was the fee, Sterling said. He withdrew cash to pay off his partners. He forged your signature on the withdrawal slips because he needed a scapegoat, if the IRS ever looked too closely. He was setting you up for 3 years, Liam, from the day you moved in. My hands shook. So he didn't just take advantage of her illness. He planned it? He waited for it, Sterling corrected. He waited for her to get sick enough to lose control, but not sick enough to die immediately. You were the perfect cover. The dutiful grandson who distracted everyone while he looted the vault. And the judge spoke? I asked, remembering the headline in my head. When does the truth get told? Tomorrow, Sterling said. I've called a formal hearing, not a court hearing, a reading, here, in this library. Who is coming? Everyone, Sterling smiled, a cold, hard smile. The family, the lawyers, and Julian. Julian? They're letting him out? I petitioned for a temporary transport, Sterling said, under heavy guard. I want him to be here. I want him to hear the final accounting. Why? Because Sterling picked up a small leather-bound book from his stack. It wasn't the garden log. It was an old, worn diary. Because we found this in his safe. He kept it. Maybe as a trophy. Maybe because he couldn't bring himself to destroy the one thing that proved he was loved.
What is it?
Clara's journal from before the dementia set in. The year before you came. Sterling opened the book. There is a passage here. Julian asks about the money every day. Liam asks about the roses. I know who will hold my hand when I die. And I know who will try to pry the rings off my fingers. Sterling closed the book. Tomorrow, Liam, we don't just clear your name. We bury him. The next morning. The library was crowded. It was the same room where they had accused me of being a thief a week ago. But the atmosphere was different now. The air was heavy with dread. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Robert sat in the corner, silent. Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, sat at the head of the table, looking pale. He knew he had facilitated Julian's scheme, wittingly or not, and he was terrified of the Bar Association. I stood by the fireplace. I wore a clean suit, one I had bought yesterday with the advance from a book publisher who wanted my story. I hadn't said yes yet, but the check cleared. The door opened. 2 deputies led Julian in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. His wrists were shackled to his waist. He looked 10 years older. His hair was unwashed. His face was gaunt. He saw the family and sneered. He saw me and looked away. They sat him down at the far end of the table. Judge Sterling stood up. He didn't sit. He paced the room, his cane clicking on the hardwood. "We are here," Sterling began, his voice low and commanding, "to conclude the business of the estate of Clara Vane." "Get on with it," Julian muttered. "I plead the fifth." "This isn't a trial, Julian," Sterling said. "This is a reckoning." Sterling picked up a remote. A projection screen descended over the bookshelves. "You told the family that Liam Vane embezzled $500,000, Sterling said. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. It was complex, full of red and black lines. "This is the forensic audit conducted by my firm over the last 72 hours, Sterling said. "We traced every cent, every dime." "And?" Uncle Robert asked, leaning forward. "Liam Vane," Sterling said, pointing at a column, "withdrew a total of $52,000 over 3 years. The room murmured. "That's a lot of money," Sarah whispered. "Wait," Sterling raised a hand. "Every single dollar of that $52,000 matches to the penny receipts for medical supplies, grocery bills, heating oil, and garden maintenance." He clicked the remote. Images of receipts. My receipts, which Sterling's team had recovered from the cloud backup of the scanning app I used. The one Julian forgot to delete from the iPad. Flashed on the screen. "He didn't take a salary," Sterling said. "He didn't take a stipend. In fact, on 3 occasions, he deposited his own unemployment checks into the household account to cover the electric bill." I looked down. I didn't know they found that. "Now," Sterling turned to Julian, "let's look at the other column." The screen turned red. $3.2 million. The room gasped. $3 million? Sarah shrieked. "But the estate was only worth 5. "Exactly," Sterling said. Julian drained 60% of the liquid assets. He liquidated the bond portfolio, he mortgaged the summer cottage, and he funneled it all into this account. The screen showed a bank account in the Cayman Islands. Account holder, J. Vane Holdings. "But here is the interesting part," Sterling said, walking over to Julian. "He didn't just steal it, he lost it." Julian flinched. "He invested in high-risk crypto schemes. He leveraged the money on futures trading, and he lost. All of it. Sterling leaned down, his face inches from Julian's. You aren't a mastermind, Julian. You're a gambler. A bad one. You stole from your grandmother to cover your debts to people who break legs for a living. Julian was shaking. It's a lie, he whispered. I was diversifying. And then Sterling straightened up. When the money ran out and Clara was still alive, you panicked. You needed the house, the land, the last asset. But Liam was in the way. So you decided to destroy them both. Sterling turned to the family. There is no money left, he announced brutally. The inheritance you are waiting for? It's gone. Julian spent it on digital coins and bad bets. Aunt Sarah burst into tears. Uncle Robert looked like he was having a heart attack. However, Sterling said, his voice softening slightly, there is the house. He picked up a document from the table. The last will and testament. The real one. Not the one Julian tried to forge. He looked at me. Clara Vane was a smart woman. She knew Julian was a shark, and she knew the rest of you were absent. Sterling put on his glasses. Article 4. To my children and grandchildren who visited me only when the sun was shining, I leave my love and the hope that they find their own way. He paused. Article 5. To Liam Arthur Vane, who stayed when the rain came, who held my hand when I forgot my name, and who protected the green things when the winter was hard. Sterling looked at me, his eyes shining. I leave the entirety of the Vane estate. The house, the land, and the garden. Silence. Julian let out a low, guttural laugh. It's worthless, he spat. The accounts are empty, Liam. The house is a money pit. The taxes alone will bankrupt you in a year. You didn't win. You inherited a corpse. I looked at him. I looked at the family who were now looking at me with a mix of envy and pity. Julian was right. Without the cash reserves, the estate was a burden. I had no job. I had no money. I had a burnt greenhouse and a massive tax bill coming. But then I remembered something. I walked to the table. I picked up the garden log, the one I had rescued. You're wrong, Julian, I said. I opened the logbook to the very back, to a page that was glued shut. I had found it last night. Grandma didn't trust banks, I said. She remembered the Depression. She trusted dirt. I tore the page open. Inside was a map, a sketch of the rose garden. She told me once, I said, looking at the map, don't let them take the green. I thought she meant the plants, but she meant something else. I looked at Sterling. She buried the gold bars, I said. The gold Arthur bought in the 70s. She buried them under the prize roses, the only place she knew I would never let anyone dig up. Julian's eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Gold, Robert whispered. How much gold? Enough, I said, closing the book. Enough to fix the greenhouse. Enough to pay the taxes. I looked at Julian. And enough to hire the best prosecutors to make sure you never see the sun again. Julian screamed. He lunged at me, dragging the table with him, but the deputies slammed him back into the chair. Take him away, Sterling ordered. As they dragged him out, Julian was screaming about his gold, about how he was the favorite. When the door closed, the room was quiet. Aunt Sarah dried her eyes. She looked at me, a calculating gleam returning to her gaze. Liam, honey, she started. About the gold. No, I said. But we're family. Family, I said, walking to the window to look out at the ruined greenhouse, is who stays when the winter comes. I turned to them. The gold belongs to the estate, and the estate belongs to me, and I have plans for it. Plans that don't include any of you. I looked at Sterling. Mr. Henderson, please escort my relatives out. I have a garden to rebuild. The morning after the revelation was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a hurricane has stripped the trees bare. The family was gone. The police were gone. The reporters had packed up their vans, chasing the next tragedy. It was just me, Elena, and Judge Sterling standing in the center of the rose garden. The sun was barely peeking over the eastern ridge, casting long, pale shadows across the frost-covered grass. The air smelled of winter and wet iron. In my hand, I held a spade. Not a gardening trowel, but a heavy-duty steel spade. "Are you sure about this, Liam?" Sterling asked, leaning on his cane. He looked tired. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving him looking his age. Memory is a tricky thing. Clara might have been speaking in metaphors. "She didn't use metaphors for the roses," I said, testing the ground with the tip of the spade. "She knew exactly where every root was." I looked at the map in the garden log. It was a crude sketch, drawn with a shaky hand. A star was marked beneath the peace rosebush, a massive 60-year-old plant that Arthur had planted the day he returned from the war. I felt a pang of guilt. To get to the box, I would have to disturb the roots. "Forgive me, old friend," I whispered to the rosebush. I struck the earth. The ground was hard, frozen solid for the first few inches. I put my weight into it, breaking through the crust into the softer, dark soil beneath. Elena stood by with a thermos of coffee, watching silently. She was wearing her old uniform. Not because I asked her to, but because she said it made her feel like things were normal again. I dug for an hour. Sweat soaked through my thermal shirt despite the freezing air. The pile of dirt grew next to me, 2 feet down, 3 feet. Nothing but earth and worms. "Liam," Sterling said gently, "maybe—" Clang! The sound was dull, heavy. Metal on metal. I froze. I dropped to my knees, abandoning the spade. I dug with my gloved hands, scraping away the dirt. Something grey and rusted appeared. It wasn't a chest. It was an old military ammunition box. Waterproof. Bomb-proof. Arthur's. "Help me," I grunted. Elena put down the coffee and grabbed one handle. I grabbed the other. We heaved. The suction of the mud fought us, but with a wet, sucking pop, the box broke free. We hauled it up onto the grass. It was heavy, unbelievably heavy. I sat back on my heels, breathing hard. My burned hand throbbed, a reminder of the fire that almost took this all away. "Open it," Sterling whispered. The latch was rusted, but the seal held. I used the edge of the spade to pry it up. It groaned, then snapped open. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and layers of velvet, were bars. They weren't shiny like in the movies. They were dull, yellowish, heavy blocks. Gold. Real physical gold. Arthur's insurance policy against a world he never quite trusted. But on top of the bars, there was something else. A white envelope, sealed with wax. I picked it up. My name was written on it in Clara's elegant pre-sickness script. To Liam. I tore it open. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the letter. I read it aloud, my voice cracking in the gold air. "My dearest Liam, if you are reading this, then the winter has come. I know Arthur bought this gold to protect us from poverty, but I buried it to protect you from greed. I saw how the money changed the others. It made them hungry but never full. I saw how you looked at the garden. You were the only one who understood that the true gold is the sunlight on a leaf. I hid this not to make you rich, but to give you a choice. You can use this to buy a life of leisure, or you can use it to build something that lasts. Don't let the weeds take the house, Liam. Make it bloom. Love, Grandma. I lowered the letter. Elena was crying openly now. Sterling wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. I looked at the gold. It was worth millions. Enough to fix the greenhouse 10 times over. Enough to pay the taxes for a century. Enough to never work again. But that wasn't the choice she gave me. Make it bloom. I closed the box. Judge, I said, standing up. I need to set up a meeting with the best architects and medical consultants in the state. Medical consultants? Sterling frowned. I thought you were going to restore the estate. I am, I said, looking up at the looming empty mansion. But not as a house. It's too big for one man. And it has too many ghosts. Then what? A sanctuary, I said. For people like her, people who are forgetting. A place where they can walk in a garden and feel safe. Where no one ties them to a bed or drugs them to keep them quiet. I looked at Eleanor. The Clara Vane Memory Care Center, I said. And I want you to be the head of patient advocacy, Eleanor. Eleanor gasped. Me? But I'm just a maid. You were the only one who listened to her, I said firmly. That makes you more qualified than any doctor I know. I turned to the house. We're not just planting roses anymore, I said. We're planting dignity. 6 months later. The sound of construction was a symphony. Hammers banging, saws buzzing, the beep, beep, beep of heavy machinery. It was loud, chaotic, and beautiful. I stood on the scaffolding of the new greenhouse. The glass was going in today, triple paned, UV filtered, state of the art. My burned hand had healed, leaving a jagged scar across the palm. I liked it. It was a map of the battle. Boss! I looked down. Matteo was waving a clipboard. He was wearing a hard hat and a vest that said Project Manager. I had hired him the day after the trial. He had quit the auto shop and turned out to be a genius with logistics. The delivery trucks are here with the trees, Matteo shouted. Japanese maples, where do you want them? South quadrant, I yelled back. Near the koi pond, they need the shade. I climbed down the ladder. The estate was transforming. The gloomy, dark hallways of the mansion were being opened up. We knocked down walls to create airy, light-filled common rooms. We replaced the slippery antique rugs with safe, non-slip flooring that looked like warm wood. We weren't erasing the history, we were repurposing it. I walked through the garden. It was spring now, the queen of night tulips. I had ordered, the ones that saved me, were in full bloom, their dark purple petals drinking in the sun. I checked my phone. I had a missed call from the prison. Julian. He called once a week. I never answered. He was serving a 12-year sentence for embezzlement, arson, and elder abuse. The gold revelation had been the final nail. The IRS had seized his assets to pay back the taxes he owed on the stolen money. He was bankrupt, alone, and furious. I let it go to voicemail. I walked to the main gate. A car was pulling up. It was a sleek black town car. Mr. Henderson, the old family lawyer, stepped out. He looked nervous. He had managed to keep his license by cooperating fully with Sterling's investigation, but he was on thin ice. Liam, he nodded, clutching a briefcase. Mr. Henderson, To what do I owe the pleasure? I thought Sterling handled all the legal work now. He does, Henderson said. This isn't about the trust. This is personal. He pulled out a letter. Your Aunt Sarah and Uncle Robert asked me to give you this. I didn't take it. What is it? A petition. Henderson cleared his throat. They are asking, well, since the gold was found on the property, and technically the property was shared before probate closed, they feel they are entitled to a finder's fee, or at least a settlement. I stared at him. They want a cut, I said. They are struggling, Henderson said diplomatically. Robert made some bad investments based on Julian's advice. Sarah is losing her house. I took the letter. I felt the weight of it, the weight of their entitlement, the weight of their endless, bottomless hunger. I looked at the construction site behind me. I saw Elena walking a new patient, an elderly man with confusion in his eyes, through the tulip beds. I saw the peace on the man's face. I looked back at Henderson. Do you have a pen? I asked. Henderson blinked, surprised. He handed me a gold-plated Parker pen. I flipped the envelope over. I wrote a single sentence on the back. The weeds have been pulled. I handed it back to him. Give them that, I said. Liam, Henderson sighed. They will sue. Let them, I smiled. I have the best lawyer in the state, and I have the truth. And frankly, Mr. Henderson, I have work to do. I turned my back on him and walked towards the greenhouse. That evening, the work crews went home. The silence returned. But it wasn't the heavy silence of the past. It was a resting silence. I sat on the stone bench by Clara's grave. I had cleaned the headstone. I had planted fresh lavender around the base. It's almost done, Grandma, I whispered. Judge Sterling walked up the path. He moved slower these days, but his eyes were still bright. The board approved the scholarship fund, Sterling said, sitting down next to me, for students studying landscape architecture and geriatric care. The Liam Vane Grant. Change the name, I said. Make it the Clara Vane Grant. I'm just the gardener. Sterling chuckled. You're a stubborn man, Liam. I learn from the best. Sterling looked at the house, glowing with warm light in the dusk. You know, he said softly, there was one thing in the audit I never told you. What? The forensic team found a recurring payment in Clara's old files, from 20 years ago. Small amounts, monthly. To whom? To a savings account in your name, Sterling said. She started it the day your parents died. She put $50 in it every month until she got sick. Julian never found it because it was under your middle name, Arthur. I looked at him, stunned. How much is in it? With interest? About $30,000, Sterling said. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough for what? Enough to buy a truck that doesn't smoke, Sterling smiled. And maybe enough to take a vacation? You've been fighting a war for 3 years, son. You need to rest. I looked at my hands. 30,000. It was the exact amount I needed to buy the rare seedlings for the Japanese garden I wanted to build in the North Wing. I laughed. No vacation, I said. I have to plant the maples next week. Sterling shook his head, smiling. I thought so. He stood up. I'm heading home, Liam. Elena is locking up the main office. You coming in? In a minute, I said. I just want to watch the sun go down. Good night, Mr. Architect. Good night, Judge. He walked away. I sat there as the sky turned purple, the same color as the wisteria. I thought about Julian in his cell, counting the days. I thought about Sarah and Robert, counting their losses. They spent their lives trying to capture the wind, trying to hold on to things that slipped through their fingers. I reached down and picked up a handful of soil. It was cool and damp. This was real, the cycle of growth and decay, the winter that kills and the spring that heals. I wasn't just the survivor of a tragedy. I was the steward of a legacy. I stood up and dusted off my pants. Tomorrow, the first residents would arrive. Tomorrow, the house would be full of stories again. Some stories would be fragmented, broken by disease. But here, in this garden, they would be held. They would be safe. I walked back toward the house. As I reached the door, I saw a reflection in the glass. It wasn't the tired, scared man who had packed his truck in the rain 6 months ago. It was a man with a straight back, a man with a purpose. I opened the door and stepped inside. The smell of old dust was gone. It smelled like lavender, and coffee, and home. 1 year later, it was the official opening day of the Clara Memory Care Center. The garden had been reborn. The new greenhouse, built of reinforced glass and white steel, shone under the summer sun. Inside, new orchid specimens, grafted from the resilient plants I had rescued, bloomed in the warm, humid air. Outside, the paved pathways led through the new Japanese garden. Bright red Japanese maples, which Matteo and I had carefully planted according to the Feng Shui principles Clara once taught, stood proudly. I stood on the podium, made of solid oak, looking down at the front lawn. The rows of seats were filled with new faces, not relatives. These were the families who had entrusted their loved ones to this garden. Judge Sterling sat in the front row, looking 10 years younger. He had become the chairman of the center's board of trustees. Beside him was Elena, holding a small microphone, preparing to speak. I wore a clip-on microphone. I wasn't wearing a suit. I wore my old denim shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing the faint scar across my palm. 1 year ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. This place was a house of silence and deceit. I stood right here, and I was called a greedy thief. I looked straight into a small camera recording for the local news. Today, I want to talk about greed, I said. My family, and specifically my cousin Julian, believed my grandmother's assets, Clara Wayne's legacy, were the numbers in the bank. They searched for it in offshore accounts, in papers, and in forged wills. But Grandma Clara knew where to hide true wealth. She hid it in the soil. She hid it in things that required patience and care. She knew that the easiest things to acquire are the easiest things to lose. I gestured toward the greenhouse. The gold we found did not buy us riches. It bought us time. It bought us patience. It bought us restoration. This center is not a nursing home. This is a harvest room. This is where we cherish every clear moment of memory, every smile, every recollection of the garden. This is where we prove that legacy is not what you keep, but what you give away. I handed the floor to Elena. Elena stepped up, her hands no longer shaking. I worked for Miss Clara for 15 years, Elena said. I was fired because I tried to protect her. Today, I am not a maid. I am a guardian. I commit to every family here that we will listen. Even when the memory fades, we will hear the heart. She paused, looking directly at the greenhouse. And we will never let anyone fight the winter alone. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't polite applause. It was the applause of empathy and profound gratitude. After the ceremony, I stood alone in the Japanese garden. The wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze. It is beautiful, Liam. I turned. It was Judge Sterling. "I never thought this dark place could be turned into something so bright," he said. "I just carried out her plan, Judge," I replied. Sterling pulled a single sheet of paper from his coat pocket. "What is that?" I asked. "It's a special request," Sterling said, "from the Department of Justice." Julian tried to contact one of his victims, one of the investors he defrauded. He violated his strict confinement conditions. "And what do they want?" "They want a detailed affidavit from you," Sterling said, "about his character, about his malice, to keep him in maximum security." I looked at the paper. I could spend the afternoon writing about Julian's greed, deceit, and cruelty. I could give voice to my final rage. I looked out at the garden. I looked at my scarred hand. "I don't need to do that," I said. "You don't need to, but it would help." I shook my head. "No, Judge, I don't need to do that. I am finished with Julian." I picked up the pruning shears on the stone bench and cut a fully bloomed peace rose, pale yellow, vibrant, and strong. "When I was an architect," I said, "I tried to design buildings that wouldn't decay, but I failed. Now I am a gardener. I don't stop decay, I turn it into fertilizer." I handed the rose to Sterling. "Julian is the decay, Judge. We used him to fertilize this place. He is no longer relevant." Sterling looked at the rose, then at me. He placed the paper back into his coat pocket. "All right, Liam," he said. "I understand." He turned and walked away. Later that evening, I took a walk alone. I entered the greenhouse. The scent of orchids and new soil enveloped me. I walked to the marble bench in the corner where Clara used to sit, thinking of Arthur. I remembered the moment Julian used me and the garden to threaten her. The pain was still palpable. I sat down on the bench and closed my eyes. I thought about everything I had lost, my career, my money, my peace. But I thought about everything I had found, my strength, my purpose, and my love. I had lost a loved one, but I had saved a garden, and more importantly, I had saved my own honor. I opened my eyes. On the opposite bench, a faint figure was sitting. Not one of the residents. It was the faint, luminous image of Grandma Clara. She didn't speak. She just smiled. A peaceful smile. Her eyes were clear. She held her hand out toward me, not asking for anything, but giving. "Thank you, my son." A faint breeze whispered in my mind. The winter is over. I reached out my hand. I didn't feel flesh. I felt only a wave of warmth, like the spring sun touching my scar. Then the image faded. I sat there for a long time. I stood up, took a watering can, and began tending to the orchids. I watered them slowly, carefully. It was work. It was love. It was patience. It was Wayne legacy. I smiled. I am Liam Wayne. I am the architect. I am the gardener. And I will never let anything go to waste again.